C-71 he was. Too kind. The group was gripped with fear. They frantically swung the hunting knives strapped to their waists, slashing at the rain of snakes. It was like a real-life version of Fruit Ninja. Their blades moved so fast they almost sparked, leaving them no time to stop. Before long, the ground was piled high with snake corpses, layer upon layer. Blood sprayed through the air like a wild, chaotic dance. But the snakes seemed endless, continuing to fall relentlessly from above. Everyone's stamina was draining fast. Especially the young man who had been bitten earlier. His name was Brandon Hunter. His face had grown pale, his breathing labored. If the venom wasn't sucked out soon, he'd be doomed to die under this rain of snakes. What do we do now? The others weren't faring much better. They had managed to kill hundreds of snakes, but one slip-up could mean certain death. This place is insane. No human should ever set foot here. Just as despair began to set in, something unexpected happened. The snakes suddenly froze mid-air, as if paralyzed. Then, one after another, they exploded with loud bangs, sending chunks of flesh flying everywhere. Blood mist filled the air, turning the scene into something straight out of a nightmare. In just a few seconds, the once overwhelming swarm of snakes had been almost entirely wiped out. The few that survived slithered away in panic, as if they'd encountered something utterly terrifying. What just happened? Chris and the others stopped in their tracks, stunned. They stared blankly at the carnage around them, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Then, a tall figure slowly emerged from the blood-soaked haze. Despite the rain of blood, his white shirt remained spotless, as if untouched by the chaos. It was Ethan. His domain of the dead now covered a massive area, easily suppressing the entire swarm of snakes in an instant. When Sean saw the figure, his eyes lit up with joy. Ethan, you came to help us. Yeah, Ethan nodded calmly. The group finally realized that the newcomer was an ally, and an incredibly powerful one at that. Relief washed over them. Brandon, in particular, felt like he had just escaped death itself. His face was filled with gratitude. Thank you for saving me. No need to thank me, Ethan replied with a faint smile. His handsome face softened, radiating a warmth that felt like a gentle spring breeze. Your next chapter awaits on Empire. He was too kind. The group couldn't help but stare at him, momentarily dazed. But Chris, looking at Ethan's smile, felt a chill run down his spine. His body tensed involuntarily. He had encountered Ethan once before during a mission with Mia and knew exactly who, or rather, what, he was. Ethan wasn't just any ordinary person. He was the absolute ruler of the skyscraper zone, a phantom infected, and the terrifying king of the undead. He's actually here. Still, Chris knew Ethan wasn't hostile. In fact, he had just saved their lives. Fear aside, Chris couldn't help but feel deeply grateful. Uncle Chris, can you, suck the venom out for me? Brandon suddenly asked, breaking the tension. Sure. Chris snapped out of his thoughts and looked at Brandon's neck. The blackened blood was still oozing from the wound. If Brandon weren't an awakener with a superhuman physique, he'd already be dead. But the sight of the wound was unsettling. It made Chris hesitate. Still, with Brandon's life on the line, Chris gritted his teeth and leaned in, pressing his mouth to the side of Brandon's neck to suck out the venom. The two of them ended up in an awkwardly close position, their posture unintentionally suggestive. Meanwhile, Mia's large eyes were fixed on Ethan. She suddenly remembered something. That list of Black Hand Legion members you gave me last time, where did you find it? In an underground mall, Ethan replied matter-of-factly. Oh, Mia nodded, her brows furrowing slightly. She had noticed before that Ryan seemed to have ulterior motives toward Ethan, but she hadn't realized he was connected to the Black Hand Legion. This deal was a loss, she muttered under her breath. Don't be so stingy, Ethan said casually, though his gaze had shifted to the Tachi sword in Mia's hand. Its sleek, unique design caught his eye. The rest of the group began searching through the surrounding crates. Most of them had been destroyed by the pythons, but a few still contained seeds that were surprisingly intact. These seeds looked viable, likely still capable of growing crops. Finding these supplies filled everyone with joy. Well, everyone except Chris and Brandon, who were still huddled together as Chris sucked out the venom. Chris spat out several mouthfuls of blackened blood before finally finishing the job. His lips were swollen to the point they looked like two sausages hanging off his face. That should do it, Chris muttered, exhausted. Thanks, Uncle Chris, Brandon said gratefully. The two of them slumped against the wall, sitting down to rest. The ordeal had drained them both, especially Brandon. His face was still pale, and his body trembled slightly. He couldn't help but feel lucky to have survived. Honestly, it was a miracle he was still alive. With shaky hands, Brandon pulled out his phone to send a message, letting someone know he was okay. Chris, sitting beside him, glanced over curiously. "Who are you texting?" "My online girlfriend," Brandon replied, his face lighting up with happiness. "We haven't met in person yet, but I've seen her photos. She's got fair skin, gorgeous looks, and legs for days." "Oh." Chris raised an eyebrow, his expression turning thoughtful. "Brandon, you'd better be careful," Chris said seriously. "What if she's actually someone from the Black Hand Legion trying to scam you?" "No way." Brandon's smile faltered. "Why not? These days, it's not just humans you have to worry about. Even monsters have evolved intelligence. They can use the internet to trick people too. Who knows if the person you're chatting with is human, or something else entirely?" Chris said, his tone dead serious. Brandon's face turned pale at the thought. He realized Chris might have a point. The internet was full of all kinds of shady characters, and now, even monsters. It was better to be cautious. "So, what should I do?" Brandon asked nervously. "Listen to me, Brandon. The internet is a deep, dark place, and you're not equipped to handle it. Why don't you just give me your phone? I'll chat with her for you," Chris said, his face completely straight. Ellipsis. Meanwhile, the commotion they had caused earlier had already drawn the attention of Serpent Eye and his zombie forces. "Boss, someone's entered our territory. They're in the farmer's market," a zombie reported. "Humans." Serpent Eye raised an eyebrow, glancing over his shoulder. Behind him stood a massive horde of zombies, tens of thousands strong, including elite fighters. He had been preparing to launch an attack on Ethan, but now, at this critical moment, humans had wandered into his domain. A cruel smile spread across Serpent Eye's face. "They've practically delivered themselves to us as strategic resources." Zombies were at their strongest right after consuming fresh flesh. Their cells became hyperactive, enhancing their physical strength, speed, and reflexes to peak levels. "Let's go. We'll deal with those humans first. It's on the way anyway," Serpent Eye ordered. With that, the zombie horde began to move. The ground trembled. Under their sheer numbers, their advance like an unstoppable tidal wave. Among them were grotesque elites, including the massive, bloated Michelin and the arrogant spider zombie woman. Back on Ethan's side, the group had finished resting and were ready to move out. Chris and the others, now carrying the seeds they had salvaged, exited the farmer's market. The area was eerily quiet, the silence oppressive. The zombies in the vicinity had already been cleared out, leaving behind a dead, desolate atmosphere. "Let's keep it up, everyone. We're halfway through the plan. With all these seeds, the shelter will definitely reward us," Chris said, trying to motivate the group. Brandon nodded, quickening his pace. He couldn't wait to leave this hellhole behind. "Stop." Ethan's calm voice suddenly rang out from behind them. "Huh." Brandon froze, turning around with a puzzled expression. "What's wrong?" "There's something in front of you," Ethan said, his tone steady. Brandon frowned in confusion and looked ahead. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. But as he squinted, he noticed something glinting faintly in the sunlight, a thin thread stretched across his path. It was a strand of spider silk. Though nearly invisible, it was incredibly tough and razor-sharp, easily as deadly as any weapon. If Brandon had taken another step, he would have been decapitated on the spot. His heart pounded as he realized just how close he had come to death. The deadly thread was less than 2 inches from his neck. C-72 your fights with me. If he took even one more step forward, he'd be dead, no question about it. As their eyes scanned further down the street, they realized the spider silk wasn't just in one place. It crisscrossed the entire area, like a web of laser beams cutting through the air, stretched across the street in every direction. "What the hell is this?" The group was shaken to their core. The 5-star corpse nest was far more dangerous than they'd imagined. One wrong move, and they'd be dead. This wasn't a place humans were meant to tread. Read new chapters at Empire. This wasn't here when we came through earlier. "When did this happen?" Brandon asked, frowning. He was sure they'd walked this exact path before. Ethan's calm gaze fixed on the distance. "Because when you came through, they hadn't shown up yet." "Who?" Chris and the others tensed up, a deep sense of unease creeping over them. Well, I didn't expect you to be so sharp." Suddenly, a sharp, mocking female voice echoed from above. Everyone instinctively looked up. Hanging upside down in midair was a woman. Her lower body wasn't human. It had 8 spider legs, and strands of spider silk stretched from her body to the tops of nearby buildings. In broad daylight, this woman dangled upside down in the middle of the street. Her long hair swayed back and forth, and her pale face bore a chilling, bloodthirsty smile. The scene was nothing short of horrifying. The group froze, their breath catching in their throats. They instinctively took a few steps back. "It's the Spider Empress," Chris stammered, his voice trembling with fear. The Spider Empress was infamous, a former overlord in her own right, known for her brutality. She'd been subdued by the Serpent Eye zombie king and brought under his control. Everyone in the shelter had heard of her. And now, here she was. But it wasn't over yet. From all directions, low, guttural growls began to echo. The sound of zombies, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, rose like a tidal wave, growing louder and louder. A massive horde of zombies began pouring into the street, a dense, endless swarm. Among them, one figure stood out. A grotesquely obese zombie nicknamed Michelin. His bloated body jiggled with every step, and the ground seemed to quake beneath his weight. A zombie horde. Chris and the others turned pale as death. Their faces were drained of all hope. The horde was massive, easily tens of thousands strong. Among them were elite zombies, leaping onto nearby rooftops with terrifying agility. They crouched on all fours, their predatory eyes locked on the group, surrounding them completely. "They're all here," someone muttered. Even Mia, who had seen her fair share of horrors, had never witnessed anything like this. No matter how strong an individual was, there was no way to take on a horde of this size. Even ants, when there are enough of them, can take down an elephant. And these weren't ants, they were zombies. If nothing else, they'd wear you down until you dropped. As the horde surged forward, a towering figure appeared on a high-rise in the distance. It was the Serpent Eye Zombie King. His massive frame loomed over the battlefield, his piercing yellow eyes scanning the group below. His presence radiated dominance, as if he ruled this entire region. When his gaze fell on them, it felt like a dagger stabbing into their hearts. Even the Serpent Eye Zombie King had shown up. He was the undisputed ruler of this area, the apex predator. Is this really necessary? Chris muttered bitterly, his face twisted in despair. What had he done to deserve this? Did he ruin the guy's favorite show? Sleep with his girlfriend. All they'd done was come out here to scavenge for seeds. And now, the entire zombie army had mobilized to trap them here. It was absurd. Chris sighed in resignation. Guess I can't say I didn't deserve this. The group was utterly hopeless. They didn't even have the will to fight back anymore. Some of them were even considering ending their own lives to avoid the agony of being torn apart by zombies. Under the crushing weight of despair, Brandon's trembling hands pulled out his phone. He'd just sent a message to let his family know he was safe. Now, he was rewriting it as a final goodbye. What a cruel, hopeless world this was. Mia, however, remained calm. She rested her long blade on her shoulder, her sharp eyes fixed on the scene ahead. Her expression didn't waver. "So, this is the target." "Yeah, more or less," Ethan replied, tilting his head slightly as he assessed the situation. "Got it." Mia nodded, shifting her grip to hold her blade with both hands. She raised it in front of her, ready for battle. "Let's do this." "Wait, what?" Chris and the others stared at her in disbelief. She wanted to fight this. The Serpent Eye Zombie King's gaze locked onto Ethan. Though he'd never seen him before, he could sense the aura of a fellow apex predator. "I didn't expect to see you reduced to running with prey." "There's a lot you didn't expect," Ethan replied casually, completely unfazed. Serpent Eye's grin stretched unnaturally wide, reaching all the way to his cheekbones. His piercing yellow eyes narrowed slightly, and a sinister smile crept across his face. Seeing Ethan walk into his territory alone, Serpent Eye felt victory was already in his grasp. "Looks like I overestimated you. You're actually dumb enough to walk in here and throw your life away. Fine, I'll grant your wish. What exactly do you have to be so smug about?" Ethan's calm voice cut through the tension. The moment he finished speaking, the sky behind him darkened. A massive black cloud surged over the horizon, dense and ominous, blotting out the sun. "Caw. Caw. Caw. Hey, buddy, I'm back." The sharp cries of crows filled the air as they swooped in like fighter jets, their sleek forms cutting through the sky. In an instant, they blanketed the heavens, their sheer numbers creating an overwhelming, oppressive presence. "What the hell?" Chris and the others gasped, their jaws dropping. "What's going on now?" But before they could process the scene above, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Shards of broken glass on the street rattled violently, and the earth shook harder and harder, as if an army was charging toward them. Roar. A thunderous bellow echoed from the distance. Bulldozer's massive frame emerged, his hulking body leading a pack of ferocious zombies. Among them were familiar faces. Laura, the Doctor Zombie, and countless others, all charging forward with terrifying speed and ferocity. The zombie horde was here in full force. The sight was nothing short of breathtaking. Chris suddenly realized what was happening. This wasn't just a fight. It was a battle for dominance between zombie kings. He was nothing more than a bystander, a minor character caught in the crossfire. How did he, of all people, end up in the middle of something like this? But as he watched Ethan's forces arrive, a flicker of hope reignited in his heart. If Ethan could defeat Serpent Eye, they might actually survive this. Maybe it was the atmosphere, or maybe it was sheer desperation, but Chris felt a surge of determination. He gripped his alloy blade tightly, his eyes shining with newfound resolve. So, you came prepared, Serpent Eye muttered from his perch on the rooftop, his sharp gaze scanning the battlefield. He quickly realized what was happening, but it didn't faze him. He was ready for a fight to the death. 3,000 against 1,000, he sneered. The advantage is mine. Kill them all, Serpent Eye roared. At his command, his zombie horde erupted into a frenzy, surging forward like a tidal wave. The two zombie armies collided with the force of a raging storm. It was chaos. Zombies clawed, bit, and tore into each other with reckless abandon. Blood sprayed through the air, and the stench of death and gore filled the battlefield. The zombies fought like rabid animals, driven by an insatiable hunger to rip flesh from their enemies. Amid the chaos, a group of zombies stood out. Ethan's elite force of 500 was like a spearhead, cutting through the enemy ranks with brutal efficiency. These elite zombies were terrifying. Even when bitten, they didn't flinch. Instead, they'd grab their attacker's head, rip it clean off, and toss it aside like garbage. Their wounds healed almost instantly, the torn flesh knitting itself back together before anyone could react. The enemy zombies fell one after another, but Ethan's elite soldiers were unstoppable, charging forward like invincible war machines, leaving destruction in their wake. What the hell are these monsters? Serpent Eye muttered, narrowing his eyes as he watched the carnage unfold. For the first time, a sense of unease crept into his mind. These weren't ordinary zombies, they were something far worse. And then there was Laura. Her lithe figure darted through the battlefield like a shadow, her face twisted into a chilling smile. Wherever she went, bodies piled up in her wake. She was a one-woman slaughterhouse, cutting down everything in her path. Stop her, Serpent Eye barked. Michelin, the grotesquely obese zombie, lumbered forward like a wrecking ball. His massive body barreled through the battlefield, sending zombies flying in every direction as he charged toward Laura. But before he could reach her, a massive fist slammed into his face. His flabby body rippled like a wave from the impact. Bulldozer stepped into view, towering over Michelin. Hey, fatso, Bulldozer growled, cracking his knuckles. Your fight's with me, C-73 Masters of Strategy. Roar. Michelin staggered back 2 steps, letting out an enraged roar. He was completely provoked now, swinging his fist straight at Bulldozer. The two of them were evenly matched. Both brute force tanks, like humanoid beasts, trading blow after blow with raw, bone-crushing power. Damn, they're intense. Serpent Eye observed the chaos from a distance, quickly realizing that the enemy's evolution level was off the charts. Their strength was overwhelming, and as soon as the fight began, his side was already at a disadvantage. But Ethan had 2 powerful allies on his side. Mia had transformed into a cold, emotionless killing machine. Her face was calm, devoid of any expression, as she wielded her 40-foot-long tachi with deadly precision. The blade cut through the air with a fierce whoosh, and wherever it passed, zombies were shredded into pieces. Black blood and mangled limbs flew everywhere. She was like a walking meat grinder on the battlefield. Sean, on the other hand, was brimming with excitement. It was his first time experiencing such a massive battle, and he seemed to be feeding off the adrenaline. With a single punch, he sent a zombie flying dozens of feet away. Bang, 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 bang. With every punch he threw, zombies were launched into the air. Some crashed into storefronts along the street, while others smashed into their undead comrades, scattering them like bowling pins. Meanwhile, Chris and the others in the rear were fighting seriously as well. They were all awakeners who had condensed their neurocores, making them as strong as elite zombies. Standing back to back, they formed a tight battle formation, working together seamlessly. Their coordinated attacks packed a serious punch. Everyone knew that if they could help Ethan win this fight, they might actually survive. With their lives on the line, no one dared to slack off. Where the hell is Genesis Biotech? Serpent Eye muttered to himself, growing increasingly uneasy. If this kept up, he knew he'd lose sooner or later. Screw it. With a leap, Serpent Eye jumped straight off the high-rise building, deciding to join the fray himself. If he didn't step in now, all his underlings would be wiped out. But the moment he landed, an overwhelming pressure crashed down on him. It felt like a tidal wave of blood, suffocating and inescapable, as if he were sinking into quicksand. What's the matter? Couldn't hold back anymore. Ethan's figure appeared in front of him. HMPH. Serpent Eye let out a cold snort, his vicious eyes gleaming with malice. The only reason you're winning is because you've got humans helping you. Didn't you just say I was hanging out with my food? Ethan's lips curled into a faint smirk. For a moment, Serpent Eye was at a loss for words. The jab hit him hard, and he felt a surge of humiliation and anger. Die. As an A-rank zombie king, Serpent Eye's body was incredibly tough. Even under the oppressive force of the domain of the dead, he hadn't lost his ability to fight. With a murderous aura radiating from him, he raised his fist and swung it at Ethan. Ethan could sense it. Whether human or zombie, Serpent Eye was the strongest opponent he'd faced so far. But he didn't dodge. Instead, he met the attack head-on, throwing his own punch to clash with Serpent Eye's. Boom. The collision of the two zombie kings was like two mountains crashing into each other. A shockwave erupted from their fists, sending nearby zombies flying into the air. Continue reading at Empire. Serpent Eye felt a sharp pain shoot through his arm and couldn't stop himself from stumbling back several steps. Under the suppression of the domain of the dead, he was no match for Ethan. You've evolved to this level. Serpent Eye was horrified to realize the massive gap between their strength. Ethan's voice was calm. Not bad. You're the first opponent to take one of my punches. You. Serpent Eye's eyes burned. With rage. Ethan's tone was so arrogant, so dismissive, it was infuriating. It felt like a blatant insult, and his anger boiled over. But before he could react, Ethan closed the distance again. The oppressive force of the domain of the dead surged forward, and Ethan's 5 fingers reached for Serpent Eye's head. Serpent Eye bared his fangs, his yellow pupils narrowing sharply. His mental energy flared wildly as he activated his awakened ability, Phantom Realm. Huh. Ethan raised an eyebrow as the world around him suddenly fell silent. The roars and howls of zombies vanished, and he found himself standing in a pitch-black void. It was as if he were floating in an endless, silent universe. The next moment, deep within the darkness ahead, something seemed to writhe and shift. Slowly, an unimaginably massive serpent emerged. Its body stretched for miles, its raised head as large as a celestial body, and its vicious eyes locked onto Ethan. Then, one after another, more colossal serpents appeared, each raising their heads high, encircling Ethan completely. The serpents loomed like gods, gazing down at all life with disdain, their overwhelming presence suffocating the air. Ethan felt as though he were trapped beneath several towering mountains. Compared to these creatures, he was like a speck of dust in the vast ocean. The oppressive aura pressed down on him relentlessly. For most people, such a terrifying sight would have been enough to shatter their sanity. But Ethan's expression remained calm. He even couldn't help but mutter under his breath, "This illusion is so fake." He had been warned about this. Little Shadow had already told him that Serpent Eye's ability was Phantom Realm, so he was mentally prepared. Faced with the monstrous serpents, Ethan felt no fear. Instead, he simply closed his eyes. If it was all fake, why bother looking at it? Ethan shifted all his focus to his senses. Moments later, he pinpointed Serpent Eye's presence. Behind me. Without hesitation, Ethan swung his fist backward. It seemed to strike empty air, but a muffled sound echoed, followed by the sharp crack of bones breaking. Ugh! Serpent Eye's figure was sent flying, and at the same time, the entire illusion shattered like broken glass. Ethan was back on the battlefield. Serpent Eye was hurled 500 feet away, smashing through several walls before finally coming to a stop. This is impossible. His mind was reeling with shock. Ethan had clearly been trapped in the illusion, yet he still managed to land a direct hit. Serpent Eye's Phantom Realm was undeniably powerful. Even a B-rank Awakener caught in it would collapse in terror. But against Ethan, it just seemed laughably ineffective. As Serpent Eye struggled to climb out of the rubble, he turned his head and saw Ethan walking toward him again. The aura around Ethan was like a surging sea of blood, radiating an overwhelming pressure that was about to engulf Serpent Eye completely. A chilling sense of doom washed over him. It was as if he could see death itself approaching. But just then, the sound of gunfire erupted from the distant street. Two towering doom hunters appeared first, their Gatling guns spitting fire as shell casings rained down. They were clearing a path ahead with relentless firepower. Behind them, two rows of armored vehicles advanced slowly, providing cover. In the center of the convoy, a group of human awakeners emerged, led by none other than Justin. He was at the head of the squad, exuding confidence. The awakeners were clad in sleek black nano-combat suits, giving them an imposing and stylish appearance. "Let's see how the fight's going," Justin said with a smug grin. In truth, he had deliberately arrived late. He wasn't truly allied with Serpent Eye and had hoped that the Zombie King and Ethan would wear each other down, leaving him to swoop in and reap the rewards. Just like when Ethan had taken down the Operation King Hunt squad. His ideal scenario. The battle would end with both Ethan and Serpent Eye severely weakened, then he could eliminate Serpent Eye as well. HMPH. A mere zombie thinks it can outsmart me. Doesn't it know that humans are masters of strategy? Justin muttered to himself, his hands steady now as he flicked open a lighter. He lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, and exhaled with satisfaction. He had completely forgotten how terrified he'd been back in Serpent Eye's lair, trembling like a leaf. Now, he was acting like a petty man drunk on his own success. From his vantage point, the battlefield was utter chaos. Everywhere he looked, there was carnage, zombies and humans locked in brutal combat. He couldn't even tell which zombies were on the same side. All he knew was that the fighting was fierce and bloody. Where's little Serpent Eye gone? C-74 so. We're even now, right? Someone from Genesis Biotech is here. Serpent Eye glanced over, his eyes narrowing as a thought crossed his mind. In an instant, countless serpents surged out from the darkness behind him. The snakes hissed and screeched as they lunged toward Ethan, but before they could get close, they exploded one by one. Shards of flesh and splattered blood filled the air, obscuring the view. Taking advantage of the chaos, Serpent Eye turned and bolted, heading straight for the Genesis Biotech camp at an incredible speed. His plan was simple: redirect the disaster toward someone else. Justin, who had been observing the battlefield, suddenly noticed a tall figure sprinting toward him. The man looked panicked and utterly disheveled. "Your journey continues on Empire." "Whoa, you got wrecked, huh?" Justin remarked, sizing up Serpent Eye. The once imposing figure was now covered in dust and grime, his chest visibly caved in as if he'd taken a massive hit. Not bad, not bad. Justin smirked inwardly. His plan was working perfectly. If even Serpent Eye, an A-ranked zombie king, had been beaten to this state, then Ethan must be in rough shape too. Once both sides were worn out, Justin could swoop in and clean up the mess. But he didn't let his thoughts show. Instead, he put on a concerned expression and asked, "Bro Serpent Eye, you're hurt. What about the zombie king in that building? How's he holding up?" "They're strong. Way too strong. We're no match for them. Thank God you showed up when you did. Hurry, take them down," Serpent Eye urged, his voice filled with urgency. Justin frowned, sensing something was off. He scanned the battlefield carefully and asked, "Wait a second, those guys getting their asses kicked over there, don't tell me they're your men." "Not all of them, but yeah, most of them," Serpent Eye admitted. "Are you kidding me?" Justin nearly choked on his own spit. "And the zombie king in the building?" Justin pressed. "There." Serpent Eye tilted his head toward the battlefield. Justin followed his gaze and froze. Amid the chaos, a tall, slender figure strolled casually through the battlefield. His white shirt was pristine, untouched by dirt or blood. Not a single scratch marred his body. Fuck. Justin cursed internally. This Serpent Eye was utterly useless. The guy had gotten himself beaten to a pulp, while Ethan looked like he'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. So much for playing the waiting game. There'd be no easy win here. Ethan, meanwhile, had noticed Serpent Eye retreating toward the Genesis Biotech camp. The camp was guarded by over 20 awakeners, but Ethan didn't rush. Instead, he walked toward them at a steady, unhurried pace. He's coming. He's coming. The tension in the camp skyrocketed as everyone's eyes locked on Ethan. As he approached, several elite zombies broke away from the main group and charged toward the human camp, their ferocity palpable. "Attack!" Justin barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The awakeners behind him sprang into action. Energy surged as elemental powers came to life. Walls of earth and ice rose to block the zombies, while fireballs and ice spears rained down in rapid succession. The coordination was seamless, a testament to their training. Among them was a woman clad in a sleek black nano-combat suit that accentuated her athletic figure. Her hair was tied back in a high ponytail, giving her a sharp, no-nonsense look. Her name was Marina Drake, a water element awakener and one of the captains of Operation King Hunt. Her reputation as a powerhouse was well earned. With a wave of her hand, a surge of blue energy coalesced into a roaring water dragon. It tore through the horde of zombies, scattering them like leaves in a storm. Humans do have some fight in them. Serpent Eye muttered under his breath. The elite zombies were being handled by the Awakeners, while the regular ones were left to the Doom Hunters. The Doom Hunters were relentless. Their Gatling guns roared, spitting out streams of bullets that shredded the zombies into unrecognizable chunks. If any zombie managed to get close, the Doom Hunters would swing their massive iron hammers, smashing their enemies into bloody pulp with a single blow. There's hope, Serpent Eye thought, a flicker of optimism lighting up his battered spirit. For the first time, he felt like victory might actually be within reach. Just then, a shadowy figure, silent as a ghost, slipped into the battlefield unnoticed. It crept around to the rear of the Genesis biotech camp and merged seamlessly with the shadow of one of the Awakeners on the ground. The figure, known as Shadow, moved without a sound, an assassin born of darkness. From the shadow of the unsuspecting Awakener, Shadow's semi-ethereal body began to rise, flickering like black flames as it took form. A psychic-type Awakener nearby suddenly sensed something amiss. He instinctively turned his head, his eyes widening in horror. Jennifer. Behind you. He shouted in alarm. What? Jennifer, the Awakener in question, looked confused. She began to turn, but before she could fully react, a sharp, searing pain tore through her body. Squelch. Shadow's clawed hand had already pierced through her back. Jennifer's body convulsed violently as blood gushed from the wound. Her eyes widened in shock, but within moments, her life slipped away. Her lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Hey. Shadow let out a sinister laugh, licking the blood off his claws with a twisted expression of satisfaction. For someone like him, who had lived in deprivation, this was the sweetest delicacy, a taste of pure ecstasy. The scene sent chills down everyone's spine. What the hell is that thing? Someone gasped. Another zombie king. Attack him. Now. The camp erupted into chaos as the Awakeners unleashed their powers, hurling attacks toward Shadow. But Shadow had no intention of sticking around. After his successful ambush, he retreated swiftly, disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, from the street corner behind him, a massive horde of zombies surged forward. This was Shadow's crew, his brothers in poverty. 5,000 zombies, including 1,000 elite ones, charged like starving wolves. Their desperation made them fearless, and the sight of so many humans only fueled their bloodlust. Damn it, he has backup. Justin realized the gravity of the situation and quickly ordered his forces to intercept the incoming horde. Meanwhile, Serpent Eye recognized Shadow immediately. So it's you, you pathetic loser. And now you're here to mess things up for me. Serpent Eye snarled. Serpent Eye, your time is up, Shadow growled in a low, menacing voice. The Awakeners Justin had brought with him were now locked in battle with Shadow's forces. But even as they fought, they couldn't forget the most dangerous threat of all, the zombie king, Ethan, who had been walking toward them just moments ago. Wait. Justin's brow furrowed as a sense of unease crept over him. He scanned the battlefield frantically, but Ethan's tall, imposing figure was nowhere to be seen. Ethan's gone. What? The others around him were equally shocked. They turned to look, but Ethan had indeed vanished. That didn't make sense. He had been walking toward them just a moment ago. Where could he have gone? But there was no time to dwell on it. Zombies were attacking from all sides, and the humans had no choice but to focus on defending themselves. With the arrival of Shadow and his horde, the battle had reached a fever pitch. Elsewhere on the battlefield, another intense fight was unfolding. The Spider Empress, a former ruler in her own right, was proving to be a formidable force. Her webs shot out in rapid succession, ensnaring zombies and either tearing them apart or immobilizing them. Her webs were thick and sticky, and many of them were covered in crows. The red-eyed crow, however, was having a rough time. It darted and weaved through the webs, narrowly avoiding capture as it tried to escape. Don't run, my little darling. The Spider Empress called out, her voice dripping with mockery as she pursued the crow relentlessly. Freak. You're such a freak. The red-eyed crow squawked in terror, flapping its wings desperately. It was almost out of the web's range and ready to ascend into the sky. But the Spider Empress was its natural predator. With a sharp hiss, she opened her mouth, and a torrent of silk shot out, weaving itself into a massive web above the crow. The crow had nowhere to go. The web fell like a net, trapping it midair. With a loud thud, the red-eyed crow crashed to the ground, tangled in the sticky threads. It struggled with all its might, but the web only tightened around it, leaving it completely immobilized. The Spider Empress's eyes gleamed with excitement as she leapt into the air, her 8 razor-sharp legs poised to strike. The red-eyed crow's crimson eyes flickered with panic as the Spider Empress's massive form loomed closer. Death was seconds away. Shit. This is it for me, the crow thought, despair washing over it. But just as the Spider Empress's legs were about to pierce its body, a massive figure stepped in front of the crow, blocking the attack like an unyielding wall. Squelch. The Spider Empress's sharp legs stabbed into the newcomer's body, leaving several bloody holes. Blood poured from the wounds, but the figure didn't flinch. It was Bulldozer. His massive arms were crossed in front of him, shielding the crow from the fatal blow. Once again, he had been turned into a pincushion. Bulldozer gritted his teeth, enduring the excruciating pain. He turned his head slightly to look at the crow and, through clenched teeth, forced out a few words. Hey, remember when we first met, and I caught you? Well, now I've saved you. So, we're even now, right? Can we call it quits? The red-eyed crow blinked its crimson eyes, staring at him for a moment. Then, it tilted its head and said softly, "You big idiot. C-75, this guy is the final boss." Bulldozer froze for a moment, visibly startled. Why is she still cursing me? Gritting his teeth against the sharp pain, Bulldozer mustered his strength and shoved Spider Empress away with both arms. Hey, tilde. Spider Empress bared her sharp fangs, her sinister grin spreading wide. Once a dominant force in her own right, she was slightly higher in rank than Bulldozer. Neither of you stands a chance against me. But before her words could fully settle, a figure emerged from the shadows, a young girl carrying a long tachi sword on her shoulder. The blade's edge gleamed, dripping fresh blood as she walked toward them. Mia's large, calm eyes locked onto Spider Empress. Let me handle this. You're asking to die. Spider Empress's pupils narrowed dangerously. This was supposed to be a battle between zombies, yet this human prey dared to challenge her. What's more, Spider Empress could sense that Mia's aura wasn't particularly strong. Swoosh. Spider Empress opened her mouth and spat out razor-sharp webs, shooting them like arrows toward Mia. Mia swung her tachi in a flurry of precise slashes, cutting through the incoming webs. However, a few strands managed to graze her cheek and shoulder. The sharp threads sliced through her skin, leaving deep cuts that began to bleed. Bulldozer and Red-Eyed Crow stared, wide-eyed. Bulldozer remembered Mia vividly. She had once visited Ethan's territory, the time he had messed up his patrol duties. He still felt guilty about it, so her face was etched in his memory. Plus, the boss had said something important back then. Mia is a friend. Oh no. Boss's friend is leaking. Soup. Bulldozer muttered nervously. But Mia's expression remained calm. If anything, she seemed to relish the pain. The sharp, stinging sensation coursing through her body triggered her ability, deadly pain. Roar. Spider Empress let out a furious roar. The scent of human blood sent her into a frenzy, like a drug coursing through her veins. Her face twisted with savage excitement as she lunged at Mia, intent on devouring her whole. Blood streamed down Mia's pale face, but her gaze remained steady, unflinching. Her grip on the sword tightened. A surge of energy erupted from her. The crystal core embedded in the hilt of her tachi began to glow with an intense, electric light, spreading rapidly along the blade until the entire sword was enveloped in crackling lightning. The long blade now shimmered like a bolt of pure electricity, arcs of lightning dancing along its edge. Slash. Mia whispered the word softly. Her figure vanished in an instant, moving so fast that she seemed to disappear. The blade in her hand cut through the air with a sharp, whistling sound. Spider Empress didn't even have time to react. The blade's edge sliced through her abdomen like a hot knife through butter, the sound of metal grinding against bone echoing in the air. Swoosh. The two figures crossed paths midair. In the next moment, Mia was already standing behind Spider Empress. Spider Empress's eyes widened in disbelief. Slowly, she lowered her gaze to her stomach, where a thin, crimson line had appeared. A second later, her body began to shift unnaturally. Black blood gushed out as her torso slid apart from her lower half. Her head tilted to the side, and she collapsed to the ground. Her upper and lower body were now completely severed. Mia stepped forward, gripping her sword with both hands. With a motion as casual as swinging a golf club, she slashed diagonally, splitting Spider Empress's head open. A crystal core flew out from the shattered skull. Mia caught it effortlessly, her movements smooth and composed, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Damn, she's strong. Bulldozer muttered, his small eyes filled with awe. No wonder the boss called her a friend. She had just taken down Spider Empress like it was nothing. At the same time, both Bulldozer and Red-Eyed Crow came to the same conclusion in their hearts. She's a good person. ... The battlefield was like a scene straight out of hell. Blood mist hung thick in the air, severed limbs and broken bodies scattered everywhere. In some places, corpses were piled into small mountains, and the foul stench of blood pooled and flowed beneath them. As the slaughter continued, Serpent Eye's forces were rapidly dwindling. The tide of battle had turned completely one-sided. Ethan's elite zombie army was so efficient that they even had spare capacity to launch an assault on Genesis Biotech. Now, Justin and his team were surrounded by a relentless horde of zombies, their attacks growing more frenzied by the second. What the hell? This isn't right. Justin cursed, his face twisted in frustration. This was supposed to be a situation where they could swoop in and reap the rewards, but somehow, things had spiraled out of control, and they were now the ones in danger. Around him, the Awakeners were locked in desperate combat. Doom Hunter's ammunition was nearly depleted, his weapons clicking uselessly as he fired his last rounds. Suddenly, a chilling laugh echoed through the chaos. Hehehehe tilde. One of the Awakeners, who had just formed an Iroquois, turned his head toward the sound, only to find Laura's ghostly face inches from his own. Before he could react, a sharp pain tore through his abdomen. His stomach had been ripped open, and his heart was yanked out in an instant. Blood gushed from the wound as his lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Laura's figure flickered and vanished, only to reappear in front of her next target. She struck with precision, aiming directly for vital points. In terms of sheer kill count, Laura was unmatched in this battle. She had already earned herself a chilling nickname, the Heart Reaper. Stop her. Someone stop her. Justin shouted, his voice tinged with panic. The way she moved was too eerie, too unnatural. The surrounding Awakeners scrambled to erect barriers, walls of earth and ice, to block Laura's advance. But while Laura wreaked havoc in front, a shadowy figure loomed behind them. For the humans, both Laura and the Shadow were terrifying adversaries. They killed without warning, striking from the darkness like true phantom infected. Did you all forget about me? A deep, magnetic voice suddenly rang out from within the crowd. Justin turned toward the sound, his eyes widening in horror. It was Ethan, the very figure who had disappeared earlier. Somehow, he had silently infiltrated their ranks and was now standing right next to him. Before Justin could react, Ethan unleashed his domain of the dead. A suffocating pressure blanketed the battlefield, enveloping everyone within its reach. With a casual wave of his hand, Ethan reached into the skull of an Awakener nearby and effortlessly extracted their crystal core. Holy shit. Justin's scalp tingled with fear. This guy is the final boss. As Ethan moved through the crowd, he plucked out 3 or 4 more crystal cores with the same ease as if he were picking fruit in an orchard. Captain Marina gritted her teeth, struggling to withstand the overwhelming pressure. Summoning all her strength, she activated her awakening ability. Water Prison. Streams of pale blue energy began to coalesce, forming shimmering walls of water in the air. The water barriers surrounded Ethan, resisting the oppressive force of his domain of the dead and trapping him inside. The water prison was composed of pure energy, and since Ethan's domain of the dead could only pass through physical objects, he couldn't simply walk out of it. But his elite zombie warriors seized the opportunity. One by one, they broke through the gaps in the human defenses, pouncing on the Awakeners. They pinned their victims to the ground, tearing into them with savage ferocity. The scene was gruesome beyond words. As the zombies closed in, Serpent Eye clenched his jaw. Despite his disdain for humans, he had no choice but to cooperate with them now. After a brief rest, his mental energy had recovered significantly. He summoned a tide of giant serpents, which surged forward and encircled Ethan's elite zombies. The once ferocious zombies froze in place, their expressions flickering with uncertainty. Some even collapsed to their knees, trembling uncontrollably. Any zombie that came into contact with Serpent Eye's mental energy was dragged into the Phantom Realm, their minds thrown into disarray. This gave Serpent Eye a moment to catch his breath. Surveying the battlefield, he realized the situation was hopeless. Maybe it's time to bail. After all, survival was the key to making a comeback. As an A-rank zombie king, he might not be able to win, but he was confident in his ability to escape. Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. With that thought, Serpent Eye began to retreat, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid drawing attention. But just as he was about to slip away, a figure suddenly charged at him with incredible speed. Like a raging bull, the figure slammed a fist into Serpent Eye's chest, sending him flying over 100 feet. It was Sean, who had arrived to assist. Huh. Justin, startled by the commotion, turned toward the source of the noise. His eyes widened in disbelief when he saw that there was a human fighting alongside Ethan's forces. What the hell is going on? The man's appearance was strikingly familiar. Justin quickly recalled seeing his profile on the refugee shelter's official website. It didn't take long for him to piece it together. You're Sean. Sean glanced at him, his sharp eyes gleaming with intelligence. Oh, you've heard of my legend. But before Justin could respond, Serpent Eye roared in fury. He unleashed a torrent of mental energy, directing it all toward Sean in a desperate attempt to crush him. Sean, however, remained completely unfazed. As long as I abandon my rational mind, your tricks won't work on me. With that, his body began to crackle and pop as his bones shifted and expanded. In an instant, he activated his fearless berserk state. C-76 everything's over. Sean charged forward like a raging tiger, his fist slamming into Serpent Eye's chest with a dull thud. The impact sent Serpent Eye flying 50 feet through the air. Damn it. This idiot. Serpent Eye muttered through gritted teeth, clearly furious. Sean's abilities were a natural counter to his own, and it was driving him mad. Justin, watching the scene unfold, was starting to panic. The opposing side wasn't just made up of Laura, Shadow, and other troublesome zombie kings, they also had Sean, one of the key figures from Refuge 002. His gaze darted around, and he noticed Ethan had already shattered the water prison that had been holding him. Ethereal blue light particles floated around Ethan as he stepped forward, each step radiating an oppressive, terrifying pressure. And not far away, a slender girl with a katana slung over her shoulder was approaching at a leisurely pace, her calm demeanor only adding to the tension. Fuck. Justin cursed under his breath. The lineup on the other side was insane. He had originally planned to swoop in and reap the benefits after the others had worn each other down. But now, it was clear, he wasn't dealing with a wounded fish. He was staring down a shark, and it was about to devour everything. It's over. Everything's over. Meanwhile, Marina and the other Awakeners were on high alert, their eyes locked on Ethan. No one dared to let their guard down for even a second. Stay sharp, everyone. During the fight, make sure to wrap your bodies in energy. Don't let him pierce through and rip out your crystal cores directly. Got it. The group responded in unison, their voices tense but resolute. Energy surged around them, their auras growing stronger by the second. One of them formed a layer of ice armor over their body, radiating a bone-chilling cold. Another's body flickered with flames, the heat distorting the air around them. This was a fight to the death, and the Awakeners were pulling out all the stops. But this kind of heightened state burned through energy fast. They couldn't keep it up for long. Not bad, Ethan muttered, a faint smirk on his lips. At the same time, his eyes glowed with a crimson light as he unleashed his full power, domain of the dead. A crushing wave of energy erupted outward, spreading across a radius of several hundred feet. Everything caught in the domain. Trash cans, streetlights, even abandoned cars, shattered instantly, as if disassembling themselves. The scene before them was one of utter destruction, like the end of the world. Marina and the others were caught in the storm, their hair whipping wildly as they struggled to hold their ground. Their faces were grim, their bodies straining against the overwhelming force. It felt like even the slightest lapse in focus would result in them being torn apart. This is insane. How does he have this much power? Could he be an S-class zombie king? The group was paralyzed with fear, their minds racing. And as Ethan's tall, pale figure drew closer, the pressure only grew more suffocating. I can't hold on any longer. A fire element awakener let out a desperate roar, flames erupting around his body as he burned through the last of his energy. His entire form ignited, transforming him into a blazing inferno. With everything he had left, he charged at Ethan, his fist engulfed in fire. Ethan didn't dodge. Instead, he raised his hand and met the attack head-on, exuding an air of absolute dominance. In the domain of the dead, he was the undisputed ruler. Boom. The collision sent a deafening shockwave through the air. The fire element awakener's body exploded under the sheer force, his flames extinguished in an instant. His final act of defiance became a fleeting burst of brilliance before fading into nothingness. A red crystal core shot out from the remains of his body, spinning through the air. Ethan caught it effortlessly, his fingers closing around it. Without hesitation, he brought it to his mouth and swallowed it whole. Warm energy coursed through Ethan's body, flowing into every fiber of his being. The domain of the dead consumed a lot of energy when fully unleashed, so replenishing it on the spot was only practical. A collective gasp echoed through the battlefield. Fear gripped everyone's hearts, reaching a suffocating peak. Some were so overwhelmed by the looming specter of death that they mentally collapsed, giving up any thought of resistance. Ethan, rarely one to initiate an all-out assault, moved like a phantom. In a flash, he appeared beside another awakener, raising his hand and smashing their skull with brutal efficiency. He moved from one target to the next, harvesting lives like a cold, unfeeling killing machine. Marina watched helplessly as her comrades fell one after another, unable to put up any meaningful resistance. A deep sense of powerlessness settled over her. She glanced around. Behind her, Little Shadow and the other zombies were slaughtering the remaining humans with ruthless precision. To her right, Laura was cutting down survivors with terrifying ease. The air was filled with a cacophony of screams, desperate cries, and the eerie, bone-chilling laughter of the undead. The scene was pure horror. When Marina turned back, she froze. A pale, handsome face was now inches from hers. His crimson eyes seemed to pierce straight into her soul. Before she could react, a large hand reached out. Her vision went black, and she lost consciousness. Her lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Ethan stood over her, holding a faint blue crystal core in his hand. Without hesitation, he popped it into his mouth. The core melted instantly, its sweet, pure energy flooding his body. Ethan savored the sensation, relishing the nourishment it provided. By now, nearly all the human awakeners had been wiped out. Ethan retracted the domain of the dead, the crimson glow in his eyes fading as his expression returned to its usual calm and composed demeanor. Meanwhile, Serpent Eye was still being relentlessly pummeled by Sean. As a psychic-type awakener, Serpent Eye's physical strength was no match for Sean, who was in a berserk state. Getting beaten up by an idiot, unbelievable. Serpent Eye grumbled bitterly, his frustration mounting. He glanced around, searching for an escape route, but his heart sank when he saw the undead closing in from all sides. Shadow and Laura were among them, along with Bulldozer and the PhD zombie, who had just finished off Michelin and were now heading his way. Above, flocks of red-eyed crows circled ominously. Some had blood-stained beaks, clutching pieces of snake flesh in their talons. After Mia had taken down the Spider Empress, the crows had feasted on the giant snakes like they were snacking on beef jerky. Despair washed over Serpent Eye. His subordinates were all dead, and Ethan's forces surrounded him on every side. A once mighty overlord, he now found himself utterly cornered. And then, Ethan began walking toward him. Serpent Eye's heart clenched in terror. The psychological trauma Ethan had inflicted on him was overwhelming. His body trembled as he muttered to himself, "Looks like I have no choice but to use my last resort." After a moment of hesitation, Serpent Eye made his decision. He dropped to his knees with a loud thud, bowing his head so low it nearly touched the ground. "Don't kill me. Please, don't kill me. I surrender. From now on, I'll serve you loyally," he pleaded desperately. "Oh," Ethan said, nodding slightly. Hearing this, Serpent Eye's heart leapt with hope. He cautiously raised his head to sneak a glance. Sean, Shadow, and the other zombies stood behind Ethan, but none of them made a move to attack him. After all, survival was the key to a comeback. Zombies had endless lifespans. As long as he stayed alive, there was always a chance to rise again. A great zombie could endure humiliation for the sake of survival. "I swear, I'll follow you for the rest of my life. I'll never betray you," Serpent Eye vowed again, his tone filled with sincerity. "Maybe in your next life," Ethan said suddenly. Roar. The horde of zombies behind Ethan let out a deafening roar and surged forward like a tidal wave, swarming over Serpent Eye in an instant. As the undead tore into him, Serpent Eye flailed desperately, his hand reaching upward as if grasping for salvation. In his final moments, he was likely cursing Ethan in his heart. "You bastard." But soon, his outstretched hand fell limp, and his body went still. Serpent Eye was no more. Ethan didn't spare him another glance. He turned and walked away. In a nearby corner, a lone human remained. The figure crouched on the ground, arms wrapped tightly around their head, face buried in their knees. Discover hidden stories at Empire. He trembled like a fragile chick caught in a freezing wind. C-77 crazy woman. Of course, the person in question was Justin. He was absolutely terrified. Ethan had deliberately ordered his men not to kill him, thinking he might still be of some use. At that moment, Justin heard footsteps approaching. Trembling, he lifted his head and saw Ethan's cold, emotionless face. Behind him were Bulldozer, Laura, and the PhD zombie, all radiating an aura of menace. Justin immediately felt a warm, wet sensation in his pants. He'd pissed himself out of fear. Don't kill me. Please, spare me. I can work with you. He stammered. Work with me. Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Justin's voice shook as he explained, I know a lot of Genesis Biotech's secrets. If you let me live, I'll tell you everything. All right, let's hear it, Ethan said, studying him with interest. Justin swallowed hard, his lips dry. Instinctively, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a cigarette, and shakily placed it between his lips. But just like last time, his hands wouldn't cooperate. He fumbled with the lighter over and over until, finally, with a faint click, a small flame flickered to life. Phew. But before he could light the cigarette, Ethan casually blew out the flame. No smoking in public places. Quote. Justin was speechless, but he forced himself to calm down and began to speak. Genesis Biotech is planning to cultivate zombies. I already know that, right? Justin nodded and continued, the X virus you got last time. That was just the first stage. It enhances cell activity and speeds up reaction times. But there's a second stage, the Y virus. It's designed to strengthen zombie skeletal structures. As Nathan's assistant, Justin was part of the management team and knew more than most. Ethan found this information useful. Where's the Y virus? It's at the company's headquarters. They're transporting it here in 10 days, Justin said, glancing up nervously. Ethan fell silent, thinking. The Y virus, like the X virus, would likely be transported by helicopter. If he could get his hands on it, his zombie army would evolve again, becoming an even more terrifying force. But this also showed just how advanced Genesis Biotech's technology was. Anything else? Ethan asked. There's more. Justin hesitated, then gritted his teeth and revealed a high-level secret. Genesis Biotech doesn't just use ordinary people for human experiments. They also use awakeners. According to reports from headquarters, they've made preliminary breakthroughs. They can now transfer and graft awakener abilities, concentrating them into a single individual. We call them cyborgs. Basically, the second-generation Doom Hunters. Cyborgs don't have their own thoughts. They act entirely according to pre-programmed instructions. Oh, Ethan's mind raced. Cyborgs sounded powerful. If they could combine multiple abilities into one body, wouldn't that mean they'd also have multiple crystal cores? Justin took a deep breath and continued, the real purpose behind cultivating zombies is to extract the abilities of phantom infected and transfer them to cyborgs, creating the ultimate killing machines. Also, headquarters has already formed a special task force to hunt down phantom infected. The team is made up of A rank or higher awakeners and is equipped with extremely expensive cyborg warriors. Their combat strength is off the charts. I see. Ethan nodded, realizing Genesis Biotech was no small threat. While he was growing stronger, they were advancing just as quickly. Justin, feeling he'd said everything he could, cautiously asked, so, can I go now? Yeah, go ahead, Ethan said casually. But Justin hesitated. Something about Ethan's tone made him uneasy. Why did it feel so uncertain? You're really not going to kill me. I'm not. If I say I won't kill you, I won't, Ethan replied, his tone a bit more serious this time. Justin finally believed him, a glimmer of hope sparking in his heart. All right, I'm leaving then. He scrambled to his feet, eager to get out of this hellhole. Without looking back, he hurried toward the street outside. But Justin hadn't taken more than a few steps when he felt a sudden gust of wind behind him. Then, with a sickening squelch, a sharp, searing pain exploded in his chest. Blood gushed out, warm and sticky. Justin's eyes widened in shock, his entire body trembling. He already knew what had happened. Slowly, he turned his head. The first thing he saw was Laura's smiling face. Ethan stood just behind her, watching him with a calm, detached expression. I didn't kill you, Ethan said flatly. Quote. Justin wanted to scream, but no words came out. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth as his vision blurred and his consciousness began to fade. In your next life, never trust a zombie. Thud. Continue your adventure at Empire. Justin's lifeless body collapsed to the ground. And with that, the battle was finally over. In truth, the fight had been decided the moment Serpent Eye was killed. The remaining zombies under his command had already given up resisting. After all, they hadn't evolved enough to develop something as complex as loyalty. Even the giant snakes had scattered, slithering away in all directions, fleeing for their lives. Ethan's zombie horde began cleaning up the battlefield, feasting on flesh and collecting crystal cores. Mia walked over, her steps light. It's over already. I didn't even get to do anything. If you're that bored, I'll call you next time, Ethan replied dryly. So, what's the plan now? No plan. Ethan had no grand ambitions of world domination. As a simple little zombie, all he wanted was to live a peaceful life, free from hunger or worry. That had been his plan even before the apocalypse. But in this world, plans rarely went as expected. If he hadn't killed Serpent Eye, the guy would have kept coming after him. Ethan had no choice but to take over his territory. Mia tilted her head, studying him. Well, now that your territory's bigger, how about letting me loot the place? Trade me crystal cores for it, Ethan said bluntly. Mia's big eyes darted mischievously. Next time, for sure. With that, she turned and walked away, taking Sean, Chris, and the others with her. Their figures grew smaller as they disappeared into the distance. Crazy woman, Ethan muttered under his breath, watching her leave. At that moment, the sun broke through the heavy clouds, its rays spilling across the blood-soaked battlefield. The lingering stench of blood in the air tinted the sunlight a deep crimson, like thin red threads stretching down from the sky. The blood pooling on the ground reflected the eerie red light, casting an otherworldly glow. It was as if the apocalyptic city had been painted with a final, macabre stroke. Ethan stood tall amidst the chaos, his silhouette commanding and unyielding. Behind him were his three most trusted lieutenants, leading a massive zombie horde. Let's go. Time to head home. At his command, the zombie army surged forward like a tidal wave. Caw. 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 Overhead, a flock of crows swept across the sky, their dark wings blotting out the sun. But trailing behind the main horde was another group of zombies, Little Shadow and his ragtag crew. Boss, what do we do now? One of his underlings asked nervously. Little Shadow hesitated, deep in thought. After this battle, he was completely in awe of Ethan. But more importantly, there was food to be had. We're going with them. Back home. C-78. Lucky, poster. After Ethan defeated Serpent Eye, his territory expanded once again. With the land now connected to Little Shadow's domain, the three regions were fully unified. The total area of the territory now spanned a massive 20 square miles, covering nearly the entire downtown area. Ethan had become an undisputed ruler of the region. Under his command, the zombie horde had more than doubled in size. What was once a force of 10,000 zombies had grown to 25,000, including 5,000 elite fighters and 500 top-tier warriors. These zombies had evolved through relentless battles, devouring neurocores and flesh, becoming even more powerful. The leadership structure of the territory also shifted. With Little Shadow joining the ranks, there were now 4 zombie lords overseeing different regions. Little Shadow took charge of the northern sector, a familiar area that had once been his domain. The PhD zombie guarded the south, while Bulldozer and Laura managed the eastern and western zones, respectively. The 4 lords were given titles based on their regions: Northern Shade, Southern Scholar, Eastern Titan, and Western Banshee. Ethan, however, remained stationed at the central skyscraper. Surrounding him were the 500 top-tier warriors, positioned strategically nearby. Beyond them, thousands of elite zombies formed concentric defensive layers, spreading outward. As for the skies above the territory, they were patrolled by the red-eyed crows, which maintained absolute air superiority. This entire area had become a fortress, especially the central zone, which was now impenetrable. It had effectively turned into a no-go zone for humans. Well, except for one person. That person was Nina, the employee. At this moment, she was kneeling on the floor, meticulously scrubbing it with both hands. The entire space around her was spotless, so clean and orderly that even someone with obsessive-compulsive tendencies would find it satisfying. Ethan sat on a sofa in front of her, one hand holding a glass filled with beverage, the other casually scrolling through his phone. The aftermath of the recent battle had already gone viral online, sparking heated discussions. Breaking news. Genesis Biotech's top executives killed in action, their Awakener forces completely wiped out. Was this a strategic failure or just a lack of strength? Revealed. The mystery behind Justin's death. Sources claim he once ventured into a 5-star zombie nest. Analysis. What are the biggest threats lurking in Los Angeles today? Justin's death had sent shockwaves through the community, leaving many terrified. It was undeniable proof of just how dangerous the outside world had become. The comment sections were flooded with speculation. Does anyone know what really happened? If not, I'm just gonna start making stuff up. I heard Justin tried negotiating with the Zombie King, but it didn't work out, so he got killed. Wow, you're already spreading rumors, huh? Then what's your version of the story? Apparently, Genesis Biotech wanted to team up with the Zombie King to take out another faction, but they lost the fight in the end. No way. That's so weak. The comments were all over the place, with no clear consensus. As Chris had once said, the internet is full of lies. Who knows what kind of monsters are lurking behind the screen? Many of the commenters weren't even survivors from the shelters. Some could have been members of the Black Hand Legion, other factions, or even intelligent monsters, or zombies, that had evolved enough to manipulate human communication. Some of these creatures even actively posted online, using lust or greed to lure human awakeners into traps. For example, looking for a partner. Message me. You're the one I've been waiting for. Let's meet up. What happens next is up to you. Hey, handsome. If you love me, send me a DM. Let's chat. Moi. Searching for a strong, brave man to protect me and survive together. I found a stash of supplies but can't carry it all. Need someone to help me move it. These posts were often accompanied by pictures of impossibly perfect women, flawless skin, long legs, seductive black stockings, and curves that seemed too good to be true. It was obvious bait, designed to reel in victims. Falling for these traps almost always ended in disaster. Over time, however, people had grown wiser and rarely fell for such blatant schemes anymore. In fact, some even left sarcastic comments to mock the scammers, just for fun. Nice try. Do you really think we're still falling for the D-cup and long legs routine? Try harder next time. Hey, sweetheart, how about throwing in some extra perks? Maybe a video clip, and so on. Ethan often came across these kinds of posts. It wasn't because he was bored or interested in the pictures of beautiful women. The real reason was, he had a persistent thought in the back of his mind. Could he turn the tables and bait the baiters? If these people, or creatures, were trying to lure others into traps, why couldn't he play along and see what kind of monsters were behind the curtain? After all, with Serpent Eye out of the picture, there weren't any immediate threats to his territory. His next big move, raiding Genesis Biotech for the Y virus, was still 7 days away. Until then, he had time to kill. So, Ethan kept scrolling through the posts, planning to randomly pick one lucky poster. Ideally, he wanted someone close to his territory. There was no point in taking unnecessary risks for something so trivial. It didn't take long before one post caught his eye. I've found a huge stash of supplies, but I'm trapped. There are zombies everywhere. Please, I need a strong man to come save me. UWU. The post was accompanied by a picture of a sweet-looking blonde girl with big, innocent eyes, wearing a spaghetti-strap tank top. She looked adorable. Exactly the kind of image designed to trigger a man's protective instincts. Ethan casually replied, "Where are you?" The response came quickly. "Read exclusive adventures at Empire." "Handsome, how many of you are there? It's really dangerous here, so please be careful." Clearly, whoever was behind this was cautious. They weren't revealing their location right away and were trying to gather information first. Ethan replied, "Just me. Just one person. ... Meanwhile, in a dark basement, the faint glow of a phone screen illuminated the face of a burly man with a scruffy beard. On the back of his hand was a tattoo of a skeletal head gripped by a black hand. "Mike, we've got a live one. He says he's coming alone," the bearded man said in a gruff voice, turning to address someone nearby. Around him were more than a dozen men, all with hardened faces and cruel eyes. The leader of the group, a gaunt middle-aged man with sharp cheekbones and cold, sinister eyes, frowned as he considered the situation. "Alone. Nobody's that stupid anymore, are they?" The leader muttered, his tone skeptical. "Not necessarily," the bearded man replied, scratching his chin. "The world's a big place. There are all kinds of idiots out there. Maybe he's just into my good looks. Or, well, the good looks in the picture I posted." The leader remained cautious. There was always the possibility that this was a trap. A group of awakeners from a nearby shelter could be using this as a pretext to hunt them down. But then again, this was always a gamble. If it didn't work out, they could always fall back on Plan B. All right, the leader finally said. Give him the location. Got it. The bearded man grinned, a cruel glint in his eyes. He picked up the phone and typed out a reply. UWU tilde 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 I'm in the underground warehouse at Citadel Outlets. I'm so scared right now. Please hurry and save me. C-79 Plan B. The middle-aged man continued giving instructions. Lila, in a bit, we'll hide while you go meet that guy alone. Check out his strength. If he's really stronger than us, stick with him. Stay by his side and act as our spy. But if he's weaker, lure him into the ambush, and we'll take him out together. Got it. No problem. From the shadows, a young girl stepped forward. Her appearance was identical to the photo on the post. This was their Plan B. Citadel Outlets. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That place was about 10 miles east of downtown Los Angeles, right off the I-5 freeway, on the city's eastern edge. Of course, Ethan wasn't sure if the address was real. For all he knew, it could be fake. But even if it was, it didn't matter. He could treat it as a chance to scout his new territory. He picked up his phone and replied. All right, I'll come. But that area's pretty dangerous, so I might take a bit longer to get there. Oh, the person on the other end immediately felt hopeful. To them, this response meant the guy wasn't that strong, probably someone they could easily take down. Ethan, of course, had said that on purpose to lull them into a false sense of security. He was playing the game of deception to perfection, like a master strategist in a high-stakes match. With that, Ethan got up, left his house, and headed downstairs. He began walking eastward. Above him, a few pitch-black crows flew by, cawing. The streets beneath his feet were still a mess. The surrounding feral zombies, upon seeing Ethan, all lowered their heads in submission, their postures radiating deference. Ethan strolled through the apocalyptic city as if he were simply out for a walk. Before long, a large figure appeared on the road ahead. It was Bulldozer, the one responsible for guarding the eastern sector. Behind Bulldozer trailed a group of zombies, while a few crows circled above his head. Why's the boss coming here? No idea. He usually never leaves his place. Could it be, he's here to check on us? Yeah, that's gotta be it. Definitely. Bulldozer, with a goofy grin on his face, walked up to Ethan. Boss, you here to check on me? I'm looking for some humans, Ethan said without breaking stride. Bulldozer froze, his expression stiffening. Something didn't feel right. Where would there be humans? This was his territory. There was no way such creatures could exist here. Boss, are you sure about that? I'm not certain yet. I'll go take a look. You all stay here for now, Ethan instructed. Oh, okay, sure. Bulldozer nodded repeatedly, though unease crept into his heart. If humans really had shown up, wouldn't that mean he'd failed at his job? As he watched Ethan's figure disappear into the distance, the feeling was oddly similar to when a company's CEO suddenly showed up to inspect a branch office. Before long, Ethan arrived at Citadel Outlets. The once bustling shopping center was now a crumbling ruin. The buildings leaned precariously, with cracks spreading across their surfaces. Weeds sprouted from the gaps, swaying in the breeze, making the entire structure seem like it might collapse at any moment. Ethan silently extended his senses. Beneath the surface, he could detect the presence of humans. On the surface, there was only one, but hidden below, there were many more. They had created a mental barrier to block detection, so he couldn't pinpoint their exact number. Perfect, Ethan muttered under his breath. As long as the address was real, their fate was sealed. They were already as good as dead. Ethan headed straight for the entrance to the underground warehouse. The staircase leading down was littered with decayed bones and dried bloodstains. The rolling shutter door ahead was corroded with rust, its surface a reddish-brown hue. Plastic trash, blown in by the wind, had piled up at the base of the door. Among the debris, faint movements of wriggling insects could be seen. Ethan didn't bother with the door. Instead, he activated his domain of the dead ability, phasing sideways into the wall and entering the building directly. The light around him dimmed instantly, and a chilling aura filled the air. The underground warehouse had been newly constructed but was still unfinished when the apocalypse hit. It had been under renovation at the time and had never been put to use, leaving it empty and desolate. Ethan's tall, lean figure emerged in the corridor. He didn't bother hiding his presence and walked forward openly. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallway, shattering the oppressive silence around him. Did he really come alone? Lila, who had been waiting for a while, noticed the faint sound of movement ahead. She couldn't help but wonder, when did he get in? Ahem. Hey there, handsome, is that you? She called out, deliberately softening her voice to sound sweet and inviting. From the shadows, a figure slowly emerged. He was dressed in a spotless white shirt, his face pale and strikingly handsome. But his eyes carried a hint of indifference, cold and detached. Ethan studied the girl in front of him. She was indeed human, and, surprisingly, she looked exactly like the photo. The meal matched the menu. The only question was, how many others were hiding nearby? He needed to draw them out. Hello, I'm here to rescue you, Ethan said calmly. Oh. Lila stared at his handsome face, momentarily stunned. Her heart skipped a beat, a strange flutter stirring within her. Originally, she had been kidnapped by members of the Black Hand Legion and, under their threats, had no choice but to join their group. Her initial plan was simple: kill Ethan and take his crystal core or neurocore. But now, seeing how good-looking he was, she couldn't help but entertain other ideas. Handsome, I'm so scared, Lila said in a soft, coquettish tone as she moved closer to Ethan, reaching out as if to grab his arm. But Ethan sidestepped her effortlessly, avoiding her touch. Where are the supplies you mentioned? He asked, his tone flat. Lila was speechless. Seriously, is he this dense? She thought. What's he even here for? Just the supplies. Still, she had to admit, his straightforwardness was kind of refreshing. The supplies, they're inside. Follow me, she said, reluctantly leading him deeper into the building, toward the ambush her group had set up. Ethan followed her, quietly sensing the energy around him. Their footsteps echoed through the corridor, the only sound in the otherwise eerie silence. For some reason, Lila felt a twinge of awkwardness. The atmosphere reminded her of meeting someone from an online chat in real life, strangely tense and uncomfortable. Neither of them spoke for a while. Eventually, Lila broke the silence. Aren't you worried I might be lying to you? I'm not worried. If there aren't any supplies, I'll starve to death anyway. Might as well take a chance and trust you, Ethan replied with a faint smile, his eyes narrowing slightly. Oh. Lila lowered her head, biting her lip. Have you ever thought about joining a group or something? She asked after a moment. Not really, Ethan said, shaking his head. But, if it meant staying alive, I might consider it. A glimmer of excitement flashed in Lila's eyes. She couldn't help but feel a connection to his words. They mirrored her own experience. We're kind of on the same wavelength, she thought. Exactly. Staying alive is the most important thing. Have you ever killed anyone in the apocalypse? Not yet, Ethan replied, shaking his head again. At this point, Lila's thoughts shifted. She was seriously considering recruiting him into the Black Hand Legion. After all, joining the group required a pledge of loyalty, killing a few humans to prove one's disdain for the old world's rules. From that moment on, members embraced absolute freedom, living by their own terms. C80 my ability. He's never killed anyone. Just like I used to be. A kind person. Lila thought to herself, her gaze softening. After spending so much time with the twisted members of the Black Hand Legion, meeting someone like Ethan felt like a breath of fresh air. He was different. It was as if a string deep in her heart had been plucked. She had been running for her life in this post-apocalyptic world, enduring humiliation and hardship just to survive. Her soul was exhausted, and all she wanted was to find someone she could truly lean on. Suddenly, a strong determination surged within her. She didn't want Ethan to die. Maybe she could bring him into the organization for now, and later, find a chance for the two of them to escape together, to leave all of this behind. If anything unexpected happens later, you have to listen to me. It might be the only way to keep you alive. What could possibly go wrong? Ethan asked with a faint smile, his tone implying confidence. After all, hunting them down was practically a sure thing. The two of them entered a large, empty hall. The surroundings were pitch black, and in the center of the room were supplies, several boxes of bottled water, instant noodles in cardboard packaging, and some canned food. These were all resources the Black Hand Legion had gathered. The supplies are here, Lila said. Ethan nodded, barely sparing the items a glance. To him, this was nothing. His real target hadn't shown up yet. He silently extended his senses, reinforcing his mental barrier. It was clear, there were humans lurking nearby. Indeed, in the surrounding darkness, pairs of eyes were fixed on him. Lila actually brought this sucker here. He really came alone. This guy's got guts, I'll give him that. Wait a second. Suddenly, a young man nearby furrowed his brow. He was a psychic awakener, highly sensitive to his surroundings, and he had noticed something unusual. I can't sense any life force coming from him. What? The others looked shocked. If he's not human, then what is he? Are we dealing with a ghost or something? A zombie. But do zombies even act like this? No. I think it's more likely his awakening ability. Maybe he can suppress his life force and mess with our senses. That's insane. The group whispered among themselves. The middle-aged man leading them scanned Ethan with a cold, calculating gaze. He couldn't sense Ethan's presence either, but seeing that Ethan was alone, he wasn't too concerned. After all, they had the numbers advantage. And since they'd gone to the trouble of setting this trap, there was no turning back now. All right, boys, take him down. Got it. The others responded in unison, stepping out of the shadows. Their energy began to surge, filling the air with a sharp, oppressive aura. Two speed-enhanced awakeners shot forward like arrows, alloy daggers gleaming in their hands as they charged straight at Ethan, aiming to end his life in one swift strike. Ethan turned his head slightly, sensing over a dozen hostile presences suddenly surrounding him. It seemed like they had quite the crowd here. The two attackers were closing in fast, their movements as fierce as tigers. In the blink of an eye, they were almost upon him. But then, a figure stepped in between them. Stop. Lila spread her arms wide, shielding Ethan with her body. Mike, don't kill him yet. The two speed awakeners skidded to a halt, their expressions dark with frustration. Hey, what the hell are you doing, you little bitch? I said don't kill him yet. Lila's voice was tense, her face betraying a hint of nervousness. From the shadows, Mike emerged with the rest of the group. What's going on? No idea. This little bitch suddenly jumped in and told us not to kill him, one of the men growled, clearly annoyed. Mike's cold, sinister eyes locked onto Lila, his expression demanding an explanation. Mike, we talked earlier. Lila forced herself to sound calm. He hates the so-called order just as much as we do. He wants to join our organization. As she spoke, she glanced back at Ethan, subtly signaling him with her eyes, a reminder to follow her lead and do as she said. Oh, yeah, I'm not a fan of order either, Ethan nodded, his tone casual. After all, his rules were the only rules that mattered. The group around them eyed him skeptically, their expressions a mix of doubt and suspicion. In this brutal, post-apocalyptic world, trust was a rare commodity. Still, the Black Hand Legion wasn't exactly picky about adding new members. Your next read awaits at Empire. The burly man with the scruffy beard from earlier frowned and asked bluntly, Lila, don't tell me, you've fallen for this guy. Lila hesitated, her words trailing off. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. The bearded man sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. Ha, unbelievable. Last night, you were telling me I was the best, and now, by this afternoon, you're in love with someone else. You little. Enough. Mike cut him off sharply. His voice carried authority, silencing the group. Joining the Black Hand Legion wasn't as simple as just saying you wanted in. You had to prove yourself. If you want to join us, you'll need to kill someone first. Preferably a survivor from one of the official shelters. The official shelters were a symbol of order and law, everything the Black Hand Legion despised. And after that, you'll still need to pass our leader's evaluation. Think you can handle that? Mike asked, his tone cold and probing. Leader. Ethan muttered under his breath. So, the Black Hand Legion had a strict hierarchy. Interesting. Who's the leader? You'll find out when the time comes, Mike replied curtly, clearly unwilling to divulge more. He still didn't trust Ethan, and his guarded demeanor made that obvious. Oh, by the way, Mike added, narrowing his eyes. What's your awakening ability? My ability. Ethan replied smoothly. It's the power to hide my presence. I can also help others conceal theirs. I knew it. The group exchanged astonished glances, their earlier doubts melting into awe. No wonder his presence had felt so off earlier. For the Black Hand Legion, constantly on the move and engaging in shady activities, an ability like this was a godsend. With it, they could avoid detection wherever they went. Still, Mike wasn't entirely convinced. You can help others hide their presence too. Prove it. Of course. Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile as his gaze shifted to the bearded man. He took a step toward him, his movements deliberate. I'll use you as a demonstration. You don't mind, do you? The bearded man stiffened, a flicker of unease crossing his face. You. Fine. Go ahead. Who's afraid of you? But if you're lying, I'll tear you apart. Despite his bravado, there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. Still, with so many people around, he figured Ethan wouldn't dare try anything reckless. You've got this, Lila whispered under her breath, clenching her fists tightly. Her nerves were on edge, but things were going according to plan so far. If Ethan could prove his worth and then complete the initiation task, he'd be one step closer to joining the Black Hand Legion. She silently prayed for him, hoping his ability was real. The last time she'd been this anxious was during a job interview. Ethan now stood directly in front of the bearded man, his smile widening ever so slightly. Under the watchful eyes of the group, he slowly raised his hand. His long fingers moved with an eerie grace as he activated his domain of the dead ability. Without hesitation, his hand passed directly into the man's forehead. The bearded man's eyes widened in shock, his gaze locking onto Ethan's. For a brief moment, his body froze as an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. Death's cold grip enveloped him, and his instincts screamed that something was horribly wrong. He tried to resist, to fight back, but it was too late. In the next instant, his vision went black, and his body crumpled to the ground. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the lifeless body. In Ethan's hand, a small crystal core gleamed faintly. See, he's not breathing anymore, is he? C-81 never trust anyone. Hiss. Everyone froze, their faces filled with shock as they collectively sucked in a cold breath. What kind of bizarre ability was this? Technically speaking, Ethan had succeeded. He'd taken out the bearded man, leaving him lifeless. But Mike and the others quickly realized something. He was playing them. Damn it. Kill him. Mike roared, his muscles bulging as his skin took on a brownish hue. It was clear he was an awakener with the petrified body ability, a physique-enhancing power. Ethan didn't hesitate. He threw a punch of his own, and at the same time, his domain of the dead unfurled. Boom. The two collided with a thunderous impact. Mike's petrified body was indeed tough. When their fists met, it sounded like two boulders crashing together. But in the end, he was no match for Ethan. His body was sent flying 50 feet, slamming into the wall with such force that spiderweb-like cracks spread across it. Meanwhile, the others around them were caught in Ethan's domain of the dead, feeling an oppressive, suffocating pressure. But the Awakeners of the Black Hand Legion were known for their ruthlessness and ferocity. Die. Gritting their teeth, they forced their energy to surge, attacking Ethan like madmen. In an instant, flames roared, wind blades howled, and the chaotic energy radiated a destructive aura. Ethan had no intention of taking on all their attacks head-on. His figure darted backward at lightning speed. Boom, boom, boom. The unleashed energy exploded, sending shockwaves rippling through the hall. Several support pillars shattered under the force, and thick clouds of dust filled the air. Crash, crash. As chunks of stone tumbled and rolled, dust rained down from the ceiling. The entire underground hall began to tremble violently. What's happening? Damn it. The upper floors are about to collapse. Where's that guy? Did he die? Quote. The Black Hand Legion Awakeners scanned the area for Ethan, but aside from the falling dust and debris, the surroundings were eerily empty. He had vanished without a trace. What the hell? Frowning, the group felt a growing sense of unease. Something about this guy was just wrong. At that moment, one of the mental-type Awakeners furrowed his brow, his expression grave as he extended his psychic senses, trying to detect anything unusual. And soon enough, he did. Hey, he's right next to you. Huh. A middle-aged man's face darkened. Flames ignited in his palm, and with a wave of his hand, a wall of fire erupted in front of him. Caught. Huh. Ethan's figure materialized, the terrifying power of his domain of the dead surging like a hurricane. The fire wall was instantly blown apart, and Ethan's fist followed right behind. Amid the scattering sparks, the man saw a fist hurtling toward him, growing larger and larger in his pupils. Boom. Even with his energy shielding him, his head was obliterated by the punch. A crystal core shot out from the remains. As the battle raged on, the violent energy wreaked havoc on the already crumbling structure. The building's collapse accelerated, with massive chunks of stone falling, threatening to bury everything. Ethan glanced upward. With a powerful leap, his figure disappeared once again. This time, the Awakeners saw it clearly. Ethan had vanished into thin air, as if he'd evaporated. Damn it. What kind of freak is this guy? Someone cursed under their breath, but the fear in their voice was unmistakable. It was like they'd just seen a ghost. Experience more tales on Empire. Mike clenched his teeth in frustration. Where the hell did he go? It seems he's already left, the mental-type Awakener said, still scanning the area. By now, the ground was shaking violently, rubble tumbling everywhere, and the deafening sounds of destruction echoed above. It was clear they couldn't stay here any longer. Let's go. We need to get out of here too. Using their abilities or sheer physical strength, the group of awakeners began climbing upward, stepping over the falling debris as they made their way out. From a distance, the citadel outlets had completely collapsed, reduced to nothing but a pile of rubble. Amid the swirling dust, a massive slab of stone was shoved aside, scraping loudly as it was pushed away. Cough, cough. The awakeners of the Black Hand Legion emerged, covered in dust and debris, their faces grim and furious. Damn it, where the hell did that guy go? I swear, I'll kill him even if it costs me my life. Yeah, let's take him down. Quote. Their curses filled the air, their anger boiling over. Wait a second. Mike suddenly froze, his expression shifting. Something wasn't right. With all the noise they'd just made, the commotion should have drawn every zombie in the area by now. So why was it so quiet? But as the dust began to settle, he noticed something. On the surrounding streets, rooftops, and even atop the wrecked vehicles, faces began to appear. Horrifying, twisted faces. Some zombies were even crawling along the walls like spiders, their movements unnervingly fluid. The group's eyes widened in shock, their pupils trembling. Because now they realized. Zombies were emerging from every direction, an endless tide that had completely surrounded them. Caw. 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 Humans. There are humans here. Hundreds of black, red-eyed crows circled overhead, their cries echoing ominously. The scene was nothing short of terrifying. And within the horde of zombies, a figure stood out, a pale, white silhouette. Behind him loomed a massive, hulking zombie, its small, glowing eyes brimming with malice and seething hatred. Mike. He's the zombie king. One of the awakeners stammered, his jaw practically hitting the ground. The ones who had been shouting about taking Ethan down just moments ago were now frozen in place, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. Surrounded by such an overwhelming force, their fear reached its peak. Mike's mind raced as realization dawned on him. This wasn't just a trap. This was a nightmare. His so-called baiting operation had reeled in something far beyond what they could handle. But among the group, only Lila seemed different. While her face was pale with shock, there was also a trace of disappointment in her expression, an almost imperceptible sadness. You're the zombie king of this region? She asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded calmly. Yeah, that's right. No wonder. Lila's voice was soft, almost to herself. She thought back to everything he'd said before, how he claimed to trust her, how he said he'd never killed anyone. It was all a lie. Turns out, you were just lying to me. And weren't you lying to me too? Ethan replied, his tone even. I. Lila hesitated, her words catching in her throat. Because for a moment, just a fleeting moment, she had believed him. She didn't want him to die. She had even been willing to stand against Mike for him. Ethan's voice broke the silence. Actually, I wasn't lying about everything. I really did come here looking for supplies. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the group. Because you are the supplies. Roar. Ethan's final words were like a death knell. The massive zombie behind him, Bulldozer, let out a deafening roar, and with a wave of his arm, the thousands of zombies surged forward like a tidal wave. Humans. In my territory. Bulldozer's hatred for the intruders was palpable. He had failed to keep his domain secure, and now, the only way to redeem himself was to tear these humans apart. As the horde charged, Mike and the others felt their courage drain away. Their bodies trembled, their minds screamed at them to fight back, but it was futile. These weren't ordinary zombies. Most of them were elite, and some were even specialized warriors with terrifying strength. The Black Hand Legion didn't even have time to put up a proper fight before they were swallowed by the relentless zombie horde. And then there was Lila. She didn't resist. She didn't even try. The despair in her heart was so overwhelming that she felt no reason to fight back. To her, this world had nothing left worth holding onto. If there's a next life, never trust anyone. The moment you take it seriously, you've already lost. That was her final thought before the darkness consumed her. C-82 I'm just a timid boy. After a while, the human screams faded completely, leaving only the grotesque sounds of zombies feasting. A few crows pecked at scraps of flesh scattered across the ruins. It was nearing dusk now. The setting sun, blood red on the horizon, cast an eerie glow over the scene, creating a surreal and haunting picture. Once the bloody feast was over, the zombie horde dispersed, each returning to its own place. Ethan, however, didn't head home. Instead, he wandered along the edge of his territory, with Bulldozer trailing behind him. Overhead, a few crows circled, giving the whole scene the vibe of a leader inspecting his domain. Bulldozer silently prayed, "Please, no more humans or other creatures showing up right now. Just let it be quiet." As they walked further, the distant sound of rushing water grew louder until he found himself standing by a river. What used to be just a small stream had now swelled into a full-blown river, wide enough to block his path. The water surged endlessly, roaring like a giant serpent charging forward. Before the apocalypse, this place had been a popular spot for camping. Couples would come here for romantic walks, families would gather for picnics, and some even swam in the river. Now, the once bustling area was deathly silent. The only remnants of life were bloodstains and decaying bones scattered along the shore. The river shimmered under the fading sunlight, its surface reflecting a crimson hue. Occasionally, a corpse or severed limb floated by, carried downstream. Across the river, a few zombies wandered aimlessly. Even though they were hundreds of feet away, they spotted Ethan and let out feral, guttural roars that echoed across the water, reverberating for what felt like forever. That wasn't Ethan's territory. "Man, these guys are really testing my patience," Bulldozer muttered, visibly irritated by the zombies' taunts. He looked ready to jump into the river and swim across to deal with them. "Stand down," Ethan ordered, stopping him in his tracks. "They're just small fry. Let them bark all they want. It's not worth the effort." Besides, crossing the river wasn't exactly easy. The waters were teeming with mutated aquatic creatures. Who knew what kind of monsters might be lurking beneath the surface? In the apocalypse, water was one of the most dangerous places to be, especially the ocean. Marine life had always outnumbered land creatures, and many were massive even before the mutations. With the abundance of prey in the sea, it was terrifying to imagine what kind of deep-sea monstrosities might have evolved by now. Reluctantly, Bulldozer backed off, grumbling under his breath. The two continued walking along the riverbank. Before long, they came across a modern highway bridge. The bridge was completely jammed with abandoned vehicles. Some had collided, others had flipped over, and a few had exploded, leaving behind charred, blackened wreckage. On the far side of the bridge, more zombies were wandering. Their grotesque faces twisted into snarls, their eyes gleaming with a savage, predatory light. It was clear these weren't ordinary zombies. They were more evolved, elite among their kind. Are they guarding the bridge? Ethan thought to himself. The placement of these elite zombies at the bridgehead wasn't random. The message was clear. The zombie king on the other side knew that a confrontation with Ethan was inevitable. Two kings can't coexist. It was either him or Ethan. One of them had to go. After crossing the bridge, the riverbank led to a sprawling forest. The dense, overlapping ridges stretched endlessly into the distance. This was Mount Wilson, one of Los Angeles' most famous landmarks. Before the apocalypse, many well-known billionaires, entrepreneurs, and celebrities lived in the luxurious villas scattered around the Mount Wilson area. The mountaintop estates, in particular, were nothing short of extraordinary, designed with such opulence that they defied the imagination of ordinary people. From these villas, you could take in breathtaking views of the entire Los Angeles basin, with the majestic mountains at your back and serene natural landscapes all around. These homes offered their residents not just unparalleled privacy and comfort but also a lifestyle that felt like the perfect escape, far from the chaos of the city, immersed in the tranquility of nature. Gazing out over the sprawling city below wasn't just a visual treat, it was a way of life, one that promised peace and a connection to the natural world. But after the apocalypse, everything changed. The animals and plants in the area mutated, turning Mount Wilson into a chaotic and dangerous place. When the outbreak first began, thousands of people from the city fled to the mountains, hoping to escape the zombie hordes. None of them ever came back. No one knew if they were alive or dead. To make matters worse, Mount Wilson was a dead zone. No signals from the shelters could reach it, cutting it off completely from the outside world. Ethan had his theories. While the mountain likely didn't host a massive zombie horde, it was the perfect breeding ground for powerful individual creatures. And then there was the Black Hand Legion, a notorious group rumored to operate in the area. Most of their members were probably hiding somewhere in the forest. Mount Wilson was a chaotic mess, a place where danger lurked around every corner. It wasn't the kind of place you'd want to visit. Even Rambo would need an army to survive here, and the Terminator would probably think twice before stepping foot in this hellhole. From a distance, Ethan noticed the forest was overrun with dense patches of climbing vines. These plants were bizarre, far thicker than they had been before the apocalypse. Their roots and tendrils glowed faintly with a crimson hue, as if veins filled with blood were running through them. A strange liquid seemed to pulse within, flowing visibly through the vines. The thick clusters of vines appeared to be spreading outward. Some had already crept beyond the forest, inching closer to the city streets. This isn't normal, Ethan thought, his expression darkening. He glanced over at Bulldozer, who stood there with his usual clueless look. Leaving him alone to guard this area didn't seem like the most reliable plan. Buddy Crow, Ethan called, looking up at the sky. Go find Laura. From now on, she'll guard this place with Bulldozer. Got it. On my way. The red-eyed crow let out a sharp cry, flapping its wings as it darted off into the distance. Little Western Banshee, I'm coming to find you. Its unique, piercing bird call echoed across the entire territory as it flew. Before long, the crow reached the western part of the territory. Its crimson eyes scanned the area until it spotted a slender figure standing atop a clock tower in the distance. Little Western Banshee, Buddy Crow called out again. Laura glanced up. She had heard it long before it arrived but had been deliberately ignoring it. Lately, this little black bird had been getting on her nerves. Can you stop calling me, Little Western Banshee? She said, her tone exasperated. Sure thing, Little Western Banshee, the red-eyed crow replied without missing a beat. Laura was speechless. If the bird weren't flying so high, she would have plucked every feather off its smug little body. What do you want? She asked, clearly annoyed. The boss says you're needed to guard the eastern side, Buddy Crow replied. Oh, Laura's eyes flickered with interest. Without another word, she leapt from the clock tower. In an instant, her speed surged to its limit, and she shot toward the east like a gust of wind. Moments later, she activated her Phantom Dash ability, vanishing entirely from sight. Buddy Crow, still flapping its wings in the air, blinked in confusion. Huh, where'd she go? After completing his inspection of the territory's borders, Ethan returned home. The interior of his home was spotless, clean and orderly, like a peaceful oasis completely cut off from the horrors of the outside world. Nothing beats being home, Ethan sighed as he sank into the couch. Even though he was incredibly powerful, the world outside his territory was still far too dangerous. Places like Mount Wilson were crawling with hidden threats, and there was no telling what kind of monsters might suddenly appear. Fortunately, his base was well protected. Surrounding the building were 500 elite zombie soldiers and thousands of other highly evolved troops. It was as secure as a fortress. Still, Ethan preferred to play it safe. Instead of venturing out, he decided to go online and look for potential prey. It was a much less risky way to hunt. Picking up his phone, he thought for a moment. Then, just like he had done with Mia and Sean before, he updated the bio on his social media profile. I'm just a timid boy, always looking for a little security. C-83. It was a fine weapon. But finding prey online wasn't exactly easy. Most of them were too far away, outside his territory, so for now, there weren't any good targets. Before long, Ethan received a private message. It was from Mia. Your profile style's pretty cool. Are you complimenting yourself? Ethan shot back. Mia replied, I'm planning to head to Pasadena. Thought I'd borrow a route from you, and I brought you something while I'm at it. How polite of you, Ethan responded. Pasadena was just across the river. Taking a route through Ethan's territory would save a lot of time compared to going the long way around. Still, Ethan was curious. What are you going to Pasadena for? Rescue mission. A supply team from the shelter got trapped there. Why? Interested. Come to my place first. We'll talk then. Ethan sent the message, set his phone down on the coffee table, and leaned back on the couch, deep in thought. Since he'd eventually have to face the zombie king across the river, this could be a good opportunity. He could blend in with the shelter's team, disguise himself as a human, and scout the area. After all, he currently knew nothing about that territory. The real question was, how were Mia and her group planning to cross the river? Were they going to fight their way across the bridge? About an hour later, a group arrived in Ethan's territory. Mia, Sean, and two young women following behind them. The two girls were both B+ rank awakeners who had condensed crystal cores. They were strong, some of the top-ranked fighters in the shelter. Mia, this is a 5-star zombie nest, one of the girls, a delicate-looking young woman, reminded her cautiously. Relax. I brought the toll fee. Mia didn't even look back as she walked forward, her aura completely unrestrained. She strode confidently down the middle of the road, clearly familiar with the area. On her back, two long Tachi swords were crossed in an X shape, giving her a strikingly cool appearance. Oh, the two girls nodded and followed her lead. The journey was surprisingly smooth. They didn't encounter a single zombie, making it even easier than the roads they'd taken before. Before long, they reached the area near Ethan's building. From a distance, they could see a figure standing in the middle of the street. He was wearing a white shirt, his face sharp and handsome, his gaze fixed on them. Hiss. The two girls knew exactly who Ethan was. They also knew he was an ally, for now. But that didn't stop the nervous tension from creeping into their hearts. Mia and Sean, on the other hand, casually walked up to greet him. "We're here," Mia said with a grin. "Yeah," Ethan replied, glancing at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of red. "Looks like you're in a hurry this time," he remarked. "We are," Sean admitted. "It's dangerous over there. The supply team's on the verge of being wiped out. If it weren't urgent, they wouldn't have risked traveling at night, or asking Ethan for help. Let's get moving, then. We should try to make it back before dark," Mia said. Then, as if remembering something, she added, "Oh, right. This is for you." She reached behind her and pulled out one of the Tachi swords, handing it to Ethan. The blade was long, nearly as tall as a person. Embedded in the hilt was a red fire element crystal core, its glow shifting and swirling like a dream. Ethan studied it. "This is the toll fee." "Yep. And it also covers last time. I said I'd pay you back, and I meant it," Mia said. After they'd taken down Serpent Eye last time, Mia had scavenged some extra loot on her way back. This Tachi was part of it, and she'd decided to use it as payment. "All right," Ethan said, taking the sword without hesitation. As his hand gripped the hilt, a red glow flashed along the blade, radiating intense heat, as if it could burst into flames at any moment. It was a fine weapon. With a thought, Ethan stored the sword in his spatial storage ring. Then, he lifted his gaze, looking past Mia and Sean to the two girls standing behind them. "Why isn't Chris here this time?" he asked. "Because this is a rescue mission, not a moving job. He'd just get in the way," Mia explained casually. In her mind, Chris was basically just a glorified mover. The two girls stiffened under Ethan's gaze. Despite their best efforts to stay calm, they couldn't help but tremble slightly. Forcing smiles, they introduced themselves. "Hi, I'm Anna Miller," said the short-haired girl with delicate features. The shorter girl quickly followed. "Hello, I'm Lillian Davis. Nice to meet you," Ethan said, his narrow eyes squinting slightly as he gave them a warm smile. Anna and Lillian froze for a moment, caught off guard. For a split second, they had the strange illusion that Ethan was just like the boy next door, the kind who'd smile at you on a sunny day, wearing a crisp white shirt. The group began making their way toward the river. The journey was, unsurprisingly, smooth. Before long, the sound of rushing water reached their ears. The river was as wide and fast-flowing as ever, its surface shimmering in the fading light. However, the occasional floating severed limb ruined the otherwise picturesque scene. "How are we crossing?" Ethan asked. Mia and her team were here for a rescue mission, but walking across the bridge would be far too conspicuous. That area was crawling with elite zombies. "Follow us," Mia said, leading the group downstream. After walking about 600 feet, she stopped. Here, the river was narrower, and the opposite bank was much closer. "Let's get started," Mia said. "Got it," Anna and Lillian replied, their expressions firm as they stepped forward to the riverbank. The two girls slowly crouched down, placing their hands on the ground. At the same time, a wave of icy energy began to spread outward, like a mist rolling across the surface of the water. The moment the cold touched the river, the water began to freeze. Within moments, a solid ice bridge stretched across the river. "Oh," Ethan raised an eyebrow, realizing for the first time that both girls were ice element awakeners. No wonder Mia had brought them along. "Let's go," Mia said, hopping onto the ice bridge and striding confidently forward. The bridge was incredibly stable. Despite the rushing water beneath it, the ice didn't wobble in the slightest. Watching the scene unfold, Ethan suddenly had an idea. If he ever had to fight the zombie king across the river, this method could be perfect for launching a surprise attack, charging straight into enemy territory. Not bad, Ethan thought, growing more satisfied with the plan the longer he considered it. The crossing went smoothly. Even when aquatic creatures attacked, they weren't particularly strong. A few fish with razor-sharp teeth leapt out of the water, but Mia twirled her sword a few times, slicing them into pieces with clean, precise movements. What a shame, Mia said, glancing at the remains. These fish have been feeding on zombies, so their bodies are infected with the virus. We can't eat them. You don't want them. Then I'll take them, Ethan said without hesitation. With a wave of his hand, he stored the fish in his spatial storage ring. His underlings wouldn't mind. They were zombies themselves and completely immune to the virus. The fish were sizable, each weighing dozens of pounds. The group encountered no powerful mutated creatures in the shallows. A few minutes later, they reached the opposite bank. The moment they stepped onto solid ground, the ice bridge melted away, leaving no trace behind. Ethan glanced at Anna and Lillian, thinking they might be useful to him in the future. He stepped forward, pulling out his phone. Let's exchange contact info. Huh. The two girls stared at him, their mouths slightly open, looking utterly stunned. Did they hear him right? C-84 I'm a tree. Back at the shelter, the two of them were often approached by strangers trying to strike up a conversation. But they never imagined that one day, the zombie king himself would ask for their contact info. What was this about? Was he planning to order takeout when he got hungry? Of course, they didn't dare refuse. With stiff smiles plastered on their faces, they exchanged contact details. Mia's sharp eyes studied him. What's this about? First time meeting us, and you're already trying to kidnap us. Don't be so stingy, Ethan replied casually. I just need to borrow a couple of construction workers. It's not like they'll break. Construction workers. The two girls exchanged confused glances but quickly caught on to what he meant. They both let out a quiet sigh of relief. Construction workers. Sure. That's way better than being delivery drivers. After adding him on social media, they noticed Ethan had updated his profile description. The two couldn't help but feel a little speechless. Yep, definitely a friend of Mia and Sean. Once they made it ashore, a few zombies were wandering along the riverbank. Their faces were twisted and grotesque, their tattered clothes stained with dried, blackened blood. One of the zombies, its cloudy eyes catching sight of Mia and the others, let out a guttural snarl and charged toward them. These were just regular zombies, low level, nothing to worry about. Mia unsheathed her tachi and, with a couple of casual swings, neatly decapitated them. Her movements were clean and precise. Sean stepped forward and kicked the zombie corpses into the river one by one. Splash. The water churned as dark blood spread out. A few strange fish were immediately drawn to the scene, swimming over to feast on the bodies. Hehehehe tilde tilde tilde. Sean crouched by the riverbank, giggling to himself. Anna, standing nearby, looked at him in surprise, a hint of admiration in her expression. Sean, you're pretty sharp. You even thought about getting rid of the evidence. Huh, nah. I just thought it was fun, Sean replied. Anna's face twitched. What's so fun about that? She couldn't understand what went on in a guy's head sometimes. Let's go. Mia called out, taking the lead as they moved forward. They were about to enter the zombie nest, and the two girls couldn't help but tense up. Ethan, on the other hand, remained calm and walked ahead as if it were just another stroll. The street ahead was a mess, completely ruined. Broken down cars littered the area, and zombies were scattered among the wreckage. They stood there swaying, their grayish-white flesh rotting away, their faces half decayed. The sight was nauseating. These were low-level zombies, completely mindless and harmless. They acted purely on instinct, and if they were lucky, they might catch a rat to eat. Mia didn't want to disturb them, though. She carefully avoided making any noise. If they accidentally alerted these low-level zombies and caused a commotion, it could attract more dangerous ones. The group moved cautiously, using abandoned cars and crumbling buildings as cover to stay out of the zombies' line of sight. Ethan, however, didn't bother with any of that. He walked openly along the street. These zombies, being mindless, only categorized things into two groups: edible and not edible. Clearly, Ethan fell into the not edible category, so they ignored him completely. The journey went smoothly. In less than 5 minutes, they reached their destination, a sugar factory. Rusted, massive tanks stood scattered across the area, and the number of zombies increased significantly within the factory grounds. Ethan quietly focused, sensing the presence of elite zombies and mutated beasts inside. There was an eerie, unnatural aura about the place. Something's off, he muttered. He didn't sense any humans, though. If there were people hiding here, They must have been using some kind of special method to avoid detection. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to survive among so many zombies. Meow tilde tilde tilde. As Ethan was lost in thought, a cat's cry echoed from within the factory. It sounded eerily like a baby crying, sending chills down their spines. What the hell was that? Sean asked, gripping the fence and peering through a gap. He spotted a pitch-black cat perched on top of a large, rusted tank. Around the cat, several elite zombies were wandering aimlessly, as if searching for something. That cat's weird. Be careful, Mia warned. Got it, Anna and Lillian replied, nodding nervously. Sean nodded along, his expression suddenly turning serious. Black cats are seriously bad news. Oh, you noticed something too? Lillian asked curiously. Sean explained with a straight face. When I was a kid at the orphanage, I watched an episode of Looney Tunes, you know. There was this black cat that used a sniper rifle to shoot the hat off a mouse's head. The mouse was so scared it fainted on the spot. Tell me that's not freaky. Quote. Lillian stared at him, utterly speechless. What? You don't believe me? Sean pressed, trying to prove his point. Ethan, you remember, right? We both saw it back then. Don't drag me into this, Ethan replied, clearly unimpressed. Meanwhile, Mia was fiddling with her phone, sending a message to the search team to ask for their exact location. But after waiting a while, there was still no response. Nothing, she said. They're not dead already, are they? Sean asked, his tone uneasy. They shouldn't be, Mia replied, analyzing the situation. She pointed out that the zombies in the factory were clearly searching for something, which meant there were probably still survivors. They've probably run into some kind of trouble. At that moment, inside a pitch-black factory building, a young man crouched in a dark corner, not daring to move a muscle. In his mind, he kept repeating to himself, I'm a tree. I'm a tree. I'm a tree. The man's hands and feet had transformed into root-like tendrils, burrowing into the dirt beneath him. His skin had dried out, resembling the bark of a withered tree. His name was Caleb Ash, the captain of the search team. He was a wood element awakener, and the ability he was using now was called plant camouflage. Above him, on the factory's steel beams, several elite zombies crawled upside down like spiders. Their nostrils flared as they sniffed the air, using their heightened sense of smell to search for prey. Not far away, a few other zombies were kneeling on the ground, feasting on a corpse. Caleb's search team had originally consisted of over 20 people. Now, more than half were dead, and the rest were scattered, hiding in various corners of the factory. He had no idea if any of them were still alive. Why are there so many elite zombies here? Caleb thought nervously, his heart pounding as one of the zombies crawled directly above him. He deeply regretted coming here. The plan had seemed simple enough. Sugar was a valuable strategic resource, high in calories, useful for medical purposes, and even for making ammunition. The factory was located on the edge of the zombie nest, so Caleb had thought it was worth the risk. But during the mission, everything went wrong. One of his team members had suddenly snapped, attacking their own teammates like a maniac. The commotion had alerted the zombies, and soon, elite zombies swarmed the area, trapping them inside. While hiding, Caleb had watched helplessly as several of his teammates were discovered and torn apart by the zombies. He couldn't do anything to help them. Moving even slightly would break his camouflage and expose him. Watching his comrades die one by one was pure agony. Just then, one of the elite zombies that had crawled away earlier returned. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, letting out low growls of, "Raw, raw." Blood-tinged saliva dripped from its mouth, falling directly onto Caleb's face. C85 Wow. He's so cool. Ugh. That's disgusting. A wave of nausea surged through Caleb as the stench of zombie saliva hit him like a brick wall. His stomach churned violently, and he almost lost his composure. I'm a tree. I'm a tree. I'm a tree. He silently chanted to himself, like some kind of self-hypnosis. Thankfully, Caleb managed to hold it together. The zombie above him, crawling like a spider, didn't seem to notice anything unusual and continued scuttling away into the distance. Woo! He let out a long breath of relief. But just then, a sudden scream pierced through the darkness of the factory. Ah! A girl's terrified cry echoed, shattering the silence. Immediately, the zombies let out guttural roars, and the elite ones nearby all turned toward the sound, rushing in that direction. Damn it! Another teammate's been spotted. Caleb's heart sank in panic. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a girl sprinting desperately toward the exit. Her face was pale with fear, and behind her, a horde of zombies was in hot pursuit. Chloe. Caleb's heart nearly stopped. That girl was his little sister, Chloe. Ahead of her, more zombies were closing in, blocking her escape. In the dimly lit factory, there was nowhere to run. Terrified, Chloe instinctively released a burst of icy energy. The air around her chilled instantly, and a wall of ice materialized, encasing her in a protective barrier. But there were over 20 elite zombies surrounding her, clawing and snarling. Rog. The zombies howled furiously, their razor-sharp claws raking against the ice wall, sending shards flying everywhere. More zombies, drawn by the noise, began converging on the scene. Chloe's heart sank into despair. Once exposed, there was no way out. Death was inevitable. From his hiding spot, Caleb watched in agony. He had already witnessed several teammates die gruesome deaths earlier, and the guilt was eating him alive. Now, his sister was about to be torn apart by zombies. The pain in his chest was unbearable. He had promised her once, he'd protect her no matter what. The ice wall was getting thinner with every attack. Chloe's energy was draining fast, and her life was slipping away. With the last of her strength, she formed an ice spike in her palm. Her eyes filled with resolve as she prepared to drive it into her own throat. No! A roar erupted from the shadows. Suddenly, countless roots shot out like writhing serpents, wrapping around the zombies' legs, torsos, and even piercing through their bodies. The roots lashed out wildly, flinging the zombies in all directions. Caleb emerged from the darkness, sprinting toward his sister. Caleb. Chloe froze, staring at the figure running toward her. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. But the elite zombies were relentless. Their vitality was monstrous, and unless their heads were destroyed, they wouldn't die. They began clawing their way back to their feet, chasing after Caleb. Watch out! Chloe screamed, her voice trembling with fear. Caleb's gaze was steady and determined. He reached his sister and turned to face the oncoming horde, spreading his arms wide as if to shield her. Swish, swish, swish. His body began to transform again, the wood-like texture spreading across his skin. Roots extended from him, weaving together into a thick wall to protect Chloe. Rog. The zombies didn't care. They lunged at Caleb, biting and clawing at him. HSS's. Caleb winced in pain. His bark-like skin held up against the attacks, but his energy was draining rapidly. It felt like every muscle in his body was locked in tension, unable to relax for even a second. Even his sphincter was clenched tight at this point. Why are you doing this, Caleb? Chloe cried, tears streaming down her face. She knew he couldn't hold out much longer. Clenching his teeth, Caleb growled, "What kind of brother would I be if I just stood by and let my little sister get torn apart by zombies? I can't do it. I just can't." Caleb. Chloe's sobs turned into uncontrollable wails as tears poured down her cheeks. As a wood element awakener, Caleb had the strongest camouflage abilities. He could have easily stayed hidden and waited for the rescue team to arrive. But instead, he chose to expose himself to save his sister. The pain from the zombie bites was excruciating, like needles stabbing into his body over and over. Caleb was clearly at his limit, but he still forced himself to speak, trying to comfort Chloe. "It's okay. Hang in there. We'll hold on together until the rescue team gets here. Really? Can we?" Chloe's lips trembled as she spoke. "Ah." Before she could finish, Caleb let out a blood-curdling scream. A zombie had sunk its teeth deep into his forearm, biting so hard it felt like it had pierced through to his very core. His body was at its breaking point. He was holding on purely through sheer willpower, his mind already starting to blur from the pain. The agony only grew worse. But Caleb refused to give in. Even if he died, he would maintain this stance, protecting his sister. His vision began to darken, and he was on the verge of losing consciousness. Then, out of nowhere, a sudden change occurred. A Tachi blade sliced through the air, cutting cleanly through a zombie's head. The creature's skull split in two, and blood sprayed everywhere as its body collapsed to the ground. Through the mist of blood, Caleb and Chloe saw a face emerge. It was a strikingly handsome face, with sharp, chiseled features that looked almost too perfect to be real. His cold, indifferent eyes carried a hint of cruelty, giving him an air of dangerous confidence. "Still alive, huh?" the man muttered, his tone casual. The Tachi in his hand, which had clearly been used to cut down countless zombies, was dripping with dark, filthy blood. This was Ethan. The blade he wielded was something he had taken from Mia as payment for helping her earlier. After dispatching the zombies, Ethan channeled energy into the fire element crystal core embedded in the sword's hilt. Flames erupted along the blade, burning away the filthy blood until it turned to ash and scattered into the air. With a flick of his wrist, Ethan extinguished the flames. The blade gleamed once more, spotless and razor sharp, as if it had never been used. The entire sequence of actions, slashing, igniting, cleaning, was executed with such fluidity and precision that it seemed effortless. Ethan's movements were graceful, almost artistic, exuding an air of calm confidence. Caleb and Chloe stared at him, completely dumbfounded. Wow, he's so cool. At the same time, a wave of relief washed over them. They realized the rescue team had finally arrived. Caleb, who had been holding on by sheer willpower, collapsed into Chloe's arms. His body had reached its limit. Ah, ah, ah. For the first time, Caleb broke down. He hadn't shed a single tear while being torn apart by zombies, but now, safe in his sister's arms, he sobbed uncontrollably. At the factory entrance, Mia and Sean were fighting off the remaining zombies, holding them back. It had been Ethan who sensed the presence of Awakeners and led the team here in time to save them. The zombies, though ferocious, were no match for Mia and Sean. With the help of 2 Ice Element Awakeners providing support, the group quickly cleared out the remaining undead. Once the area was secure, they began making their way toward Caleb and Chloe. Chloe immediately recognized Mia and felt a surge of gratitude. But as her gaze shifted to Ethan, curiosity flickered in her eyes. He was undeniably handsome. Even after slaughtering dozens of zombies, his white shirt remained spotless, a testament to his incredible skill. But, who was he? She had never heard of someone like him in the shelter. Mia, who's this? Chloe asked hesitantly. Oh, him. That's Ethan. He's a friend of mine, Mia replied casually. Oh, I see. Chloe nodded quickly, her cheeks flushing slightly. She turned to Ethan and said, Thank you. Thank you so much for saving me and my brother. It's nothing, Ethan replied, his tone calm and detached. Then, without missing a beat, he asked, You're an Ice Element Awakener, right? Yes, Chloe answered honestly, a little surprised by the question. Ethan's expression didn't change. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Let's exchange contact info, he said bluntly. Huh. Chloe froze, her face turning bright red. She lowered her head, too embarrassed to meet his gaze. Sure, he had just saved her life, but wasn't this a bit too direct? They were still in the middle of a dangerous situation, and he was already asking for her contact info. It felt so sudden. She wasn't prepared for this at all. Her mind raced. Shouldn't we at least talk about what we're going to name our future kids first? C-86, was this even possible? We need to move. Let's hurry and find the others. Mia turned and started walking ahead. The earlier fight had stirred up quite a commotion, and the noise had attracted a horde of zombies. Outside the factory, guttural growls and snarls echoed ominously, signaling that a large group of the undead was closing in fast. Chloe supported Caleb as they moved forward, her mind clouded with worry. I hope the others are okay. But Ethan couldn't shake off a strange feeling. Something felt off. It was as if an eerie, unnatural presence was creeping over them, wrapping them in its invisible grip. It wasn't long before Sean suddenly shook his head, his expression dazed and confused. Hey, did you guys hear that? A cat meowing. A cat. The others exchanged puzzled glances. What cat? There's no cat here, someone muttered. Sean, are you hearing things again? Lillian asked, raising an eyebrow. They were all used to Sean's quirks by now. He had a habit of saying weird, random things or acting in ways that didn't always make sense. No one took him seriously. But Sean pressed his palm to his forehead, his confusion deepening. In his mind, the faint sound of a cat's cry echoed again. It wasn't a normal meow, it sounded like a child wailing, sharp and grating, clawing at his nerves. And then, without warning, Sean froze in place. His usually sharp, intelligent eyes suddenly contracted, transforming into slitted, glowing yellow pupils, like a cat's. Me-o-w-w-w-w-w-w-w-w-w. The sound that came from his mouth wasn't human. It was a drawn-out, mournful wail that reverberated through the dark, empty factory, sending chills down everyone's spine. What? This time, everyone heard it. The eerie cat-like cry echoed in the silence, and they all turned to look at Sean. What they saw made their blood run cold. A shiver raced down their spines, and the hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. Sean's hair bristled, standing on end like an animal's fur. His narrowed cat-like eyes glinted in the dim light, and his lips curled into a strange, unsettling grin. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his throat, something no human should be able to produce. It sounded more like the snarl of a wild beast. Sean, you. Lillian's eyes widened in shock, her voice trembling. She was frozen in place, too terrified to move. Meow www. Sean let out another piercing cry, this one even more shrill and haunting than before. Then, in a blur of motion, he lunged at Lillian, his fist swinging toward her with terrifying speed. Get back, Mia shouted, throwing herself forward to intercept him. She raised her arm just in time to block the blow. Bam! The impact was deafening, like two steel hammers colliding. Sean's strength was monstrous, and the force of the hit sent Mia skidding backward 5 or 6 steps before she managed to steady herself. Her wristband flickered, displaying a damage reading. Pain level, 29%. This idiot's got some serious strength, Mia muttered under her breath, shaking out her arm. Sean, now completely unhinged, seemed ready to attack again. His movements were erratic, almost feral, as if he'd lost all sense of reason. But Mia wasn't about to wait for him to strike first. She darted forward, her speed blurring as she closed the distance between them. With a swift, powerful punch, she slammed her fist into Sean's face. Boom! The force of the blow sent Sean flying backward like a ragdoll. He crashed through the factory wall, the impact bringing part of it crumbling down on top of him. Dust and debris filled the air as his body disappeared beneath the rubble. The group stood frozen, staring at the wreckage in stunned silence. Their minds raced with questions. Why had Sean suddenly turned on them? What was happening to him? And, had Mia gone too far? Mia, what the hell just happened? Why did Sean attack us? Someone finally asked, breaking the silence. No idea, Mia replied, shaking her head. But honestly, I've been wanting to punch him for a while now. The group exchanged awkward glances, unsure how to respond. Before they could say anything else, the rubble shifted. Stones and debris tumbled aside as Sean slowly rose to his feet. Despite the brutal hit he'd taken, he didn't seem to feel any pain. His glowing cat-like eyes narrowed, and a twisted grin spread across his face. He looked pleased with himself. Caleb's face paled as a horrifying realization dawned on him. This happened before, he stammered. One of my old teammates. He turned just like this. He went crazy and started attacking us. That's how we got trapped here in the first place, because of them. Could it be mind control? Lillian frowned deeply, her expression tense. No. Ethan, who had been silent for a long time, shook his head. After carefully analyzing the situation and thinking it through, he finally spoke. It's more like, he's been possessed by a cat. Possessed. Everyone froze, their faces filled with disbelief. It was the first time they'd heard such a bizarre explanation. Possession. What kind of strange ability was that? Sean's mind was notoriously stubborn, practically immune to mental interference or control. It was like trying to hack into a broken computer. It barely turned on, let alone allowed anyone to manipulate it. But possession. That was a whole different story. It was like plugging in a new operating system and running it on a fresh machine. And for Sean, this was a direct counter. What do we do now? Everyone's brows furrowed, their anxiety growing. Outside, the sound of guttural roars grew louder. More zombies were closing in. Meanwhile, Sean, his eyes now gleaming like a cat's, lunged at Mia again. The two clashed, locked in a fierce battle. For the moment, Sean was occupied. Ethan's sharp gaze swept over the scene. He hadn't expected the black cat to have such a strange ability. It was unsettling. The outside world really was as dangerous as they'd feared. But how could they break this possession? Looking past the surface, Ethan knew the solution had to lie at the root of the problem. If they killed the black cat, it should sever the connection. Yeah, just kill the cat, he said calmly. What? Everyone turned to stare at him. His handsome face remained composed, as if he were discussing something as trivial as the weather. Could that really work? But there was no time to debate. The zombies were already closing in. Their grotesque faces appeared at the factory entrance, snarling and howling. They surged forward like a flood, a dense, unstoppable tide of death. Caleb and Chloe were completely drained of energy, unable to fight. Mia was still tied up with Sean. That left only Ethan and 2 construction workers to face the horde. In everyone's minds, survival alone seemed like an impossible dream. Killing the black cat, that was a fantasy. Ethan's gaze hardened. Gripping his tachi, he stepped toward the oncoming horde. His movements were steady and deliberate, his expression as calm as ever. Alone, he faced the swarm of zombies with the unshakable resolve of a Spartan warrior. A crimson glow flickered in Ethan's eyes. Domain of the dead. In an instant, an overwhelming pressure erupted from him, like a tidal wave of blood and death crashing down on the zombie horde. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The zombies, which had been charging madly, suddenly stopped in their tracks, as if someone had hit the pause button. They stood motionless, frozen in place. The world fell silent. Then, the weaker zombies began to explode, their bodies bursting apart in a spray of flesh and blood. Shards of bone and chunks of meat flew everywhere, painting the ground red. Ethan tightened his grip on the tachi. Energy surged through him, igniting the fire crystal core embedded in the blade. A wave of heat radiated outward. Whoosh! Flames roared to life, engulfing the tachi in a blazing inferno. Ethan moved. His figure blurred, moving so fast that afterimages trailed behind him. He charged into the horde, his speed almost impossible to track. The tachi sliced through the air, leaving streaks of fire in its wake. Each swing of the blade severed a zombie's head cleanly from its shoulders. Wherever the blade passed, blood sprayed into the air, only to evaporate instantly in the heat of the flames, leaving behind nothing but black ash drifting in the wind. In just a few strikes, Ethan had already cut down a large number of zombies. It was as if he were untouchable. He tore through the horde like a storm, unstoppable and devastating. Where he stood, a vacuum formed. No zombie could get close. Heads rolled, bodies were cleaved in two, and the tachi carved a path of destruction through the horde. Nothing could stand in his way. Behind him, Caleb and the others were stunned. They stared in disbelief, their minds reeling from what they were witnessing. He was that strong. Was this even possible? The scene before them shattered everything they thought they knew. C-87 well, that's creepy as hell. In the stunned silence of the crowd, Ethan continued cutting down zombies with ruthless efficiency. In just a few moments, he had already slain over 100 of them. At the same time, he was quietly scanning the area, searching for the black cat. It shouldn't be too far from here. Found it. Before long, Ethan sensed a faint presence just outside the factory, hiding beneath a large metal tank. But as he raised his gaze, two elite zombies lunged at him from the shadows. With a swift horizontal slash of his blade, Ethan decapitated both zombies in one clean motion. Their heads flew off, spraying foul blood into the air, and two neurocores popped out of their shattered skulls. These zombies were highly evolved, which meant the zombie king ruling this area was likely no pushover either. Ethan pressed forward, cutting his way through the horde until he reached the factory's exterior. Behind him lay a trail of mangled corpses and rivers of dark, putrid blood. Outside, the light was dim. The sun had fully set, and the long night had begun. But the darkness didn't bother Ethan. His sharp eyes scanned the area, and under the large metal tank, he spotted a small, shadowy figure curled up tightly. It was the same black cat he had seen earlier. Its body was coiled into a ball, completely motionless, as if it were asleep. This was one of the major downsides of possession. With its soul currently inhabiting Sean's body, the cat's physical form was left paralyzed and defenseless. However, the number of elite zombies in the area had increased significantly, as if they were deliberately guarding the black cat. In the dim light, grotesque faces emerged one by one, their eyes glowing with malice. Now that he had located his target, Ethan stopped holding back. With a single thought, he unleashed Domain of the Dead to its fullest extent. Boom, boom, boom. The zombies closest to him exploded instantly, their bodies reduced to chunks of flesh and bone. The oppressive force of the domain reached its peak. Nearby debris was crushed and twisted under the immense pressure. Even the towering metal tank groaned and warped as if an invisible hand were squeezing it. Liquid stored inside burst out in violent streams, spraying everywhere. Beneath the tank, the black cat's body trembled, curling into an even tighter ball. Meow www. It let out a piercing, anguished cry. Sensing that its physical body was in grave danger, the cat immediately abandoned Sean and returned to its own form. But the moment the black cat opened its eyes, it saw a tall, imposing figure walking toward it. With each step Ethan took, the pressure around the cat intensified, like a massive millstone grinding down on it. Not so smug now, are you? Ethan's cold gaze locked onto the cat. The black cat could feel the suffocating aura of death closing in. Its fur stood on end, its ears flattened, and its wide, terrified eyes darted around, searching for an escape. It tried to back away, desperate to flee from the terrifying domain of the dead. But its frail body couldn't even muster the strength to move. Ethan raised his tachi and swung it in a clean arc, slicing straight through the cat's head. The blade was so sharp that it cut through the skull as easily as slicing a watermelon. Yow www. The black cat let out a final, pitiful wail before collapsing to the ground. Black blood gushed from the gaping wound where its skull had been cleaved open. And just like that, the battle was over. Ethan retracted the terrifying domain of the dead, though the effort had taken a toll on him. Fully unleashing the domain consumed a significant amount of energy, about 1/10 of his reserves, judging by the series of fights he had just endured. But something caught Ethan's attention. The black cat's shattered skull didn't contain a crystal core. What the hell? He stood there, frowning, deep in thought. Could it be that possession wasn't the black cat's innate ability? Maybe. There was another explanation. Perhaps some other entity had transferred the black cat's soul into Sean's body. In other words, the ability to possess others wasn't the cat's own power, it had been granted to it by something else. Well, that's creepy as hell, Ethan muttered to himself. Still, he felt like this trip hadn't been a waste. Thankfully, he had uncovered the truth in time. If he had remained in the dark, it could have cost him dearly. Especially considering his subordinate, Bulldozer, was cut from the same cloth as Sean. Both were brain-dead brutes with immense strength but no intelligence to speak of. Roar. Just as Ethan finished off the black cat, a deafening roar erupted from deep within the area. The sound was earth-shaking, as if the entire city district trembled in response. It was clear that the slaughter at the sugar factory had alarmed the zombie king lurking within the heart of the horde's nest. The zombie army was likely mobilizing, surging toward Ethan's location. Time to go, Ethan muttered to himself. He wasn't ready for an all-out battle with them just yet. At the very least, he needed to secure the Y-virus first and allow his ace fighters to evolve further. If the fight turned into a brutal war of attrition, even a hard-won victory could leave him vulnerable to other zombie kings waiting to exploit the aftermath. Not to mention, Genesis Biotech was already watching him like a hawk. At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed from the darkness ahead. It was the rest of the search team. They had sensed the commotion and decided to stop hiding, rushing over to see if they could help in any way. But when they arrived, the scene before them left them speechless. Ethan stood alone outside the factory, surrounded by piles of mangled zombie corpses, shattered debris, and the twisted remains of the metal tank. The entire area looked like it had been ravaged by a natural disaster. Hiss. The group collectively sucked in a sharp breath, too stunned to speak. Meanwhile, inside the factory, Sean's cat-like eyes gradually returned to their usual sharpness, though his expression remained dazed. Moments ago, his mainframe had gone offline, like blacking out after drinking too much. He had lost chunks of memory and couldn't recall what had happened. All he knew now was that his entire body ached. Every inch of him felt battered and bruised. Instinctively, he reached up to touch his face. A sharp, throbbing pain greeted him. His cheeks were swollen, and his nose was bruised and discolored. What happened to me? Why does everything hurt so much? Sean asked, bewildered. Mia glanced at him and replied casually, nothing. You fell asleep and took a nasty tumble. Quote. Huh. Sean blinked in confusion. Then why were there shoe prints all over his body? We need to move, Mia said firmly, her gaze shifting toward the direction of the zombie king's roar. She wasn't the only one who had heard it. Everyone else had, too. Their faces were pale with fear. If the zombie horde surrounded them, there would be no escape. It would be the end. Did we rescue everyone? Sean asked, still trying to piece things together. Stop worrying about that and just move. Lillian snapped, urging him forward. Without wasting any more time, the group quickly left the sugar factory and ran toward the river. Fortunately, they were still on the outskirts of the zombie nest. Before long, the sound of flowing water reached their ears. But under the shroud of darkness, the river ahead looked like an endless expanse of black. Mia glanced back over her shoulder. The zombie horde was closing in fast. The ground beneath them trembled faintly, and in the distance, shadowy figures began to flood the streets, their grotesque forms illuminated by the faint moonlight. The group's builders sprang into action. Cold air radiated from their bodies as they constructed another ice bridge, just like the one they had used to get here. This time, however, the bridge had a slight curve to it, resembling a slide. Once it was ready, everyone jumped onto the bridge and slid across to the other side of the river. This is fun, Sean exclaimed, momentarily rediscovering the joy of childhood. As soon as they reached the opposite bank, the builders quickly dismantled the ice bridge. Phew. We're alive. The group collectively let out a sigh of relief. For Caleb and the rest of the search team, it felt like they had just escaped from the jaws of hell itself. They had stared death in the face and somehow lived to tell the tale. The apocalypse was truly unforgiving. Every day was a fight for survival, a constant battle against despair. On the far side of the river, zombie silhouettes began to appear. They had chased the group all the way to the riverbank. But now, the zombies could only stand there, staring across the water. Their furious roars echoed into the night, filled with rage and frustration, but there was nothing they could do. Back at the ruined sugar factory, darkness had completely swallowed the area. Salem tilde 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 Salem tilde tilde tilde. A raspy, haunting voice echoed through the night, carrying a tone of sorrow and bitterness. From the shadows, an old woman's figure slowly emerged. Her hunched frame moved with an eerie, deliberate slowness. Her white hair was wild and unkempt, and her frail body seemed barely able to support her weight. But the most terrifying thing about her was her face. Half of it was a wrinkled, human visage, weathered by time. The other half was the face of a black cat, pitch black and grotesque, with gleaming, predatory eyes. C-88 the vines. The old woman called out, but there was no response. She knew in her heart that the black cat was already dead. Heh heh heh. A sinister laugh echoed from behind her. A gaunt figure slowly emerged from the shadows. He was so thin that his skin clung tightly to his bones, and his hands, shockingly, had no flesh at all, exposing bare, gleaming white bones. Good riddance. Dead is better. Saves me from listening to that annoying meowing all day. The Bone Claw Zombie King grinned, revealing 2 rows of razor-sharp teeth. The old woman's eyes burned with hatred as she turned her half-cat face toward him, glaring coldly. But after a moment of thought, she held back her anger. There are humans. I can smell traces of them lingering here. Just food, the Bone Claw Zombie King replied dismissively. They're not going to cause any real trouble. What we should be worried about is the Zombie King across the river. He's been expanding his territory like crazy lately, making a lot of noise. Be careful, or we might end up on his radar. The old woman shot him a sideways glance. HMPH. Do you think I need you to tell me that? I've already taken precautions. They won't get through. Fine, whatever. The Bone Claw Zombie King clearly didn't want to argue with her. It was obvious there was some bad blood between them. Humming a tune to himself, he turned and walked away. I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance tilde. Quote. The old woman's terrifying face twisted in frustration, her teeth grinding. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing it on purpose to annoy her. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Ethan had already returned home after parting ways with Mia. As usual, he took a hot bath, changed into clean clothes, and swallowed 2 crystal cores before pouring himself a drink. By now, night had fully fallen, and the world outside his window was pitch black. Every night, the city descended into chaos. Zombies and mutated beasts alike grew restless, their howls and roars echoing through the apocalyptic ruins. The cycle of slaughter never stopped. Even within Ethan's territory, things weren't always peaceful. Particularly near the outskirts, around Mount Wilson, the creeping vines had begun to spread from the forest into the city. They coiled around the ruins of buildings and climbed up streetlights. These vines were an eerie crimson, like blood vessels, with what seemed like blood flowing through them. In the darkness, one of the vines wrapped around a streetlight suddenly began to move, slithering like a living snake. Stay connected via Empire. Beneath the streetlight stood a zombie, its tattered clothes soaked in blood. It swayed mindlessly, unaware of the danger above. The vine crept closer, inching toward the zombie until it was just 3 feet away. Then, in a flash, it struck like a python, coiling tightly around the zombie's neck. Graahhh. The zombie let out a guttural roar, thrashing wildly as its hands clawed at the vine. But the vine was incredibly tough, and the zombie couldn't tear it apart. With a sudden yank, the vine hoisted the zombie into the air. The zombie dangled there like a hanged corpse, its legs kicking frantically as it howled. Moments later, more vines slithered toward it. With a sickening squelch, they pierced the zombie's body, acting like straws as they began to suck the blood and flesh from it. Dark, viscous blood flowed through the vines, staining them an even deeper black. This wasn't an isolated incident. Nearby, Several other zombies were also being attacked by the vines. Some were ensnared around their waists, others by their ankles. The once quiet night was now filled with the sound of zombie screams. ROOOAAARRR. A deafening roar echoed from the distance as Bulldozer, a hulking zombie with a massive frame, appeared on the scene. His small, beady eyes scanned the chaos, but he couldn't quite figure out what was happening. Are we under attack? He muttered. He stomped forward, grabbing one of the vines that had wrapped around a zombie. With a powerful tug, he ripped it apart. A spray of dark, putrid blood gushed from the severed vine, splattering everywhere. But the vines weren't done. Dozens more crept toward Bulldozer, attempting to ensnare him. Some coiled around his ankles, while others latched onto his wrists. Unfortunately for the vines, Bulldozer might not have been the sharpest tool in the shed, but he was incredibly strong. With brute force, he tore the vines apart one by one, sending black blood flying in all directions. Realizing they couldn't overpower him, the vines retreated, dragging the captured zombies with them as they slithered back toward Mount Wilson. The ordinary zombies clawed desperately at the ground, trying to crawl forward, but they didn't have the strength to break free from the vines. In the blink of an eye, they were dragged over 30 feet away. Just then, a sharp gust of wind swept through, and a figure darted into the fray. With claws as sharp as steel blades, the figure slashed through the vines in a single fluid motion, cutting them apart and freeing the trapped zombies. Laura, now in full-on lawnmower mode, swung her claws relentlessly. Wherever she passed, the vines were shredded into pieces, and dark, putrid blood sprayed into the air. Realizing they were no match for her, the vines retreated like a receding tide, slithering back toward the forest. Laura and Bulldozer gave chase, pursuing them all the way to the edge of the woods. But the sheer number of vines was overwhelming. Far too dense to cut through completely. A few unlucky zombies were still dragged into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. Their anguished howls grew fainter and fainter until they finally faded into silence. Ruah-aarrr. Bulldozer wasn't about to let it go. He stomped forward, clearly intending to charge into the forest after them. But Laura quickly stopped him. Hey, don't go in there. Huh. Bulldozer froze mid-step, his expression full of frustration. Some stupid plants think they can mess with us. I'm going in there to rip them all out by the roots. He growled. The plants are too dense in there, Laura said, crossing her arms. Or do you want a repeat of last time, when the boss had to come drag your sorry ass out? The mention of his previous blunder made Bulldozer pause. He scratched the back of his head awkwardly, his anger cooling a little. Fine, I'll let them off the hook this time. But, what are we supposed to do about this? That's easy. Laura's tone was calm and analytical as she thought it over. We go tell the boss. Later that night, Ethan was informed of the incident. He wasn't particularly surprised. He'd already noticed the creeping vines acting strangely, as if they were slowly encroaching on his territory. So, they've finally made their move, Ethan muttered to himself. He knew that to deal with external threats, he first had to secure his own domain. The vines would undoubtedly return, and this time, he needed to put an end to them for good. However, the battle at the sugar factory earlier that day had drained some of his energy. Ethan decided not to rush into action. Instead, he rested for the night, allowing his body to recover to peak condition. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the scene of the attack. Bulldozer and Laura followed closely behind him, their demeanor respectful and serious. Boss, so it went like this. First, the vines came out of nowhere, then they did this, and then my guys got dragged into the woods. Bulldozer gestured wildly as he tried to reenact the events, clearly hoping to explain everything as thoroughly as possible. Ethan's sharp gaze swept over the area. The ground was a mess. Shattered plant stems and dark, sticky blood were scattered everywhere. Long trails of blood and drag marks stretched toward the forest, painting a grim picture of what had happened. In the distance, the dense forest loomed, its greenery vibrant and lush. Clusters of creeping vines clung to the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. At first glance, they looked like ordinary plants, completely harmless, with nothing out of the ordinary. But Ethan wasn't fooled. He could already tell that these vines weren't acting on their own. They were more like tentacles, controlled by something far more dangerous, a central mind pulling the strings. The true culprit was hiding deep within the dense forest. C-89 Endless Growth. I'll go take a look, Ethan said. Oh, okay. Bulldozer nodded dumbly. He wanted to say something to show concern, maybe remind the boss to be careful. But when he turned his head, Ethan's figure had already vanished. Ethan had activated his stealth ability and was silently making his way into the forest, step by step, like a ghost. The woods were dark and damp, eerily quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves and the strange cries of unknown birds. Ethan avoided touching the climbing vines, instead following the trail they left as he moved deeper into the forest, searching for clues along the way. He couldn't help but feel curious. What could possibly lie at the heart of these vines? The journey was smooth at first. Along the way, he came across numerous corpses, small animals, humans, and even zombies. The bodies reeked of decay, each in varying stages of decomposition. Some were crawling with maggots, while thumb-sized flies buzzed around them in swarms. As he ventured further, the vines grew denser. It was clear that this forest had been completely overtaken by them, it was their domain now. About 10 minutes later, Ethan emerged from the woods onto an abandoned mountain road. This road led to the summit, where the wealthy used to live in luxurious hilltop villas. Now, the road was overrun with vegetation, completely reclaimed by nature. On the roadside, a few overturned, rusted-out vehicles could still be seen, remnants of the chaos when people had fled into the mountains during the apocalypse. Ethan approached one of the cars and found a corpse inside, long since decayed into a skeleton. A few spiders had spun webs across the bones, crawling back and forth. The car's glove compartment, trunk, and even the gas tank had been pried open, clear signs that it had been looted. Humans have been here, Ethan muttered to himself. When the apocalypse broke out, many city dwellers fled to the mountains to escape the zombies, trying to survive in the wilderness. Though the deep forest was full of dangers, mutant beasts, mutated plants, some human awakeners still managed to carve out a slim chance of survival. Ethan turned his gaze back to the vines. Their tendrils stretched along the road, winding forward endlessly. He decided to follow them. As he walked, the number of corpses increased. The bodies were entangled in the vines, completely drained of life, leaving behind nothing but dried husks. After a while, a villa came into view. Once a luxurious building, it was now in ruins. The fences around the yard and the villa's walls were completely overgrown with vines. The leaves were large, fan-like, and a dark purplish-black color. The plant's roots and stems had grown unnaturally thick, with streams of foul, dark liquid coursing through them. "Is it in there?" Ethan muttered, sensing an ominous presence lurking within the villa. He glanced at the yard and couldn't help but notice how unique the scene was. Corpses were buried in the soil, with only their heads exposed. The roots of the vines grew directly out of their skulls. Some of the heads had rotted into bare skeletons, while others were disturbingly fresh, recent victims, likely dragged here by the vines. Well, this is an interesting take on landscaping, Ethan thought to himself, his inner voice dripping with sarcasm. He couldn't help but admire the vines' twisted sense of artistry. He stepped into the courtyard. The air was thick with the stench of death. The oppressive atmosphere was cold and suffocating, the smell of rot so strong it stung his nose. Anyone else would have immediately sensed the danger and fled without a second thought. No one in their right mind would dare approach this place. But Ethan wasn't just anyone. He walked in alone. The once luxurious villa's floor-to-ceiling windows were shattered, leaving the interior exposed. Peering inside, Ethan was greeted by a horrifying sight. Dozens of corpses hung from the ceiling, packed so tightly together they resembled rows of sausages. Humans, animals, it didn't matter. They dangled lifelessly, swaying slightly in the cold breeze that drifted through the broken windows. What is this, an art exhibit for corpses? Ethan thought. Just as Ethan was about to move forward, the grass around him suddenly began to rustle, like the warning rattle of a snake. The sound carried a sinister, venomous undertone that sent a chill down his spine. The climbing vines on the ground started writhing, slithering like snakes. One of them rose behind Ethan, coiling upward as if preparing to strike. I've been spotted, Ethan thought, his instincts kicking in. In an instant, his domain of the dead expanded outward. The vine poised to attack him shattered with a series of sharp bangs. As the domain spread, an oppressive force rippled in all directions. The surrounding vines reacted violently, like eels tossed into boiling oil. They shot upright, twisting and writhing in agony, before exploding one after another. Ethan's surroundings were soon filled with the sight of thrashing vines and the splatter of foul, dark liquid. The once eerily silent courtyard descended into utter chaos. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed from within the villa. It was shrill and unearthly, like the wail of a witch, filled with hysteria and rage. The sound lasted for a full 3 seconds, reverberating through the dense mountain valley and startling flocks of birds into flight in the distance. So, you're finally coming out, Ethan muttered. With a casual wave of his hand, Itachi materialized out of thin air. Energy surged through the blade, igniting it in roaring flames that engulfed its entire length. Fire! The bane of all plants. Ethan swung the flaming blade forward, reducing countless vines to ash. The remaining ones recoiled, retreating in fear. With the plants no longer obstructing his view, Ethan could see the villa clearly again. On the overgrown walls, the dense foliage began to shift, forming the outline of a humanoid figure. Slowly, it stepped out from the greenery. You shouldn't have come here, the Greenman said, its voice an eerie blend of male and female tones. Ethan's gaze sharpened. The figure before him was entirely wrapped in green, as if its body were woven from leaves. It was hard to tell whether it was more plant or animal. But one thing was certain. This creature was the mastermind controlling the ivy. Oh, so it's fine for you to wreak havoc in my territory, but I can't come looking for you. Ethan shot back, his tone sharp. If you're so eager to die, I'll grant your wish. The Greenman hissed. A faint green light radiated from its body, surging outward in waves. At the same time, the ivy in the surrounding area began to grow wildly, vines exploding in every direction, filling the air like a tidal wave. Ethan's vision was once again swallowed by the encroaching plants. It was as if he had been plunged into a world made entirely of vegetation. His eyes glowed with a crimson light as he unleashed the domain of the dead, pushing it to its absolute limit. A suffocating pressure surged forward, like a raging sea of blood crashing through everything in its path. Boom! A deafening explosion shattered the silence. Everything around him, every vine, every leaf, was obliterated in an instant, as if swept away by a violent storm. Leaves scattered like confetti, only to disintegrate into dust under the immense pressure. The Greenman's body trembled, clearly shaken. It hadn't expected Ethan's absolute domain to be this overwhelming. But it quickly steadied itself, refusing to back down. Energy surged from its body once more. Infinite growth. It called out softly. The vines that had just been destroyed began sprouting new buds, which rapidly thickened and grew. In the blink of an eye, the plants were back, stronger than ever. Once again, the endless greenery surged toward Ethan, enveloping him completely. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his expression darkening. This Greenman's abilities were undeniably strange. Its power was on par with that of any zombie king he had encountered outside. And its method of attack, it was almost as if it were forming its own version of an absolute domain. C90 How strong are you? The forest was in utter chaos, wild energy surging and colliding in every direction. The two opponents were locked in a tense standoff. But Greenman was brimming with confidence. Since its growth began, it had consumed countless creatures, small ones like insects and mice, larger ones like beasts, and even zombies and humans. It had devoured so much flesh and blood to evolve into its current form. The energy it had absorbed far surpassed that of most living beings. Let's see how long you can hold out. Ethan was surrounded by a storm of vines, endless and relentless. No matter how many he cut down, more kept coming. Yet his expression remained calm and composed. From his assessment, Greenman's strength was definitely at an A-rank level, maybe even higher. It was troublesome, sure, but only a little. Yeah, that's about it, Ethan muttered, stepping forward suddenly. His powerful physique came into play as his foot slammed into the ground. The moment his soul hit the earth, a deafening boom echoed. Cracks spread across the ground like a spiderweb, as if an earthquake had struck. The earth began to collapse, and the corpses buried beneath the soil were shattered into pieces. Rotting flesh and broken bones flew everywhere, along with the roots of the plants that had grown among them. If you want to kill the weeds, you have to pull them out by the roots. As Ethan took that step forward, his terrifying domain of the dead expanded with him, its oppressive aura spreading out 50 feet in all directions. It was closing in on Greenman, ready to engulf it. The combination of Ethan's overwhelming physical strength and the power of his domain made him unstoppable in this moment. Greenman froze, startled. It sensed something was wrong. That destructive energy radiating from Ethan gave it an ominous feeling, a sense of impending doom. This creature was strong, far stronger than it had anticipated. The vines that had been growing wildly began to slow down noticeably. Greenman continued to release energy, but it was clear that it was now at a disadvantage. Meanwhile, Ethan remained unyielding, his aura surging like a raging storm. The intense battle was draining energy rapidly, and Ethan had already used up about 20% of his reserves. But he could feel it. Greenman's resistance was weakening. Ethan stepped forward again, his knees bending slightly as he lowered his body. He gripped his blade with both hands, his posture like that of a predator ready to pounce. The domain of the dead continued to expand, fully enveloping Greenman. Behind them, the villa that had stood in the distance began to collapse, disintegrating into dust and scattering into the wind. Cut! Ethan roared. He tightened his grip on his tachi, channeling his energy into the blade. Flames erupted from its edge, blazing fiercely. With a powerful push from his legs, Ethan launched himself forward like a cannonball. The force of his leap caused the ground beneath him to cave in further. His body shot through the air, carrying the terrifying momentum of the domain of the dead as he charged at Greenman. The scenery blurred past him, roots, leaves, and splatters of foul blood flying in all directions. From Greenman's perspective, it was as if a storm was hurtling toward it. A natural disaster. No. A wave of dread surged through Greenman's consciousness. The aura of death was closing in fast. I don't want to die. Greenman's thoughts were filled with unwillingness and regret. It had started as a tiny blade of grass, growing stronger by devouring ants and other small creatures. Over time, it had evolved into its current form. Dissatisfied with its life in the mountains, it had dreamed of expanding into the cities, of one day spreading across the entire world. But now, just as it had stepped out of the mountains, it had encountered such a powerful foe. In the blink of an eye, the searing heat was upon it. The sharp edge of the blade was about to slice through its body. Trapped within the oppressive domain of the dead, Greenman had no way to escape. Swish! Ethan's tachi slashed through Greenman's body in a single, decisive strike. Ah! Greenman let out a piercing, agonized scream, its voice filled with despair. At the same time, all the energy it had been using to resist vanished. The snake-like vines that had been attacking Ethan began to wither, rot, and crumble into dust. In an instant, the chaos in the forest subsided. Silence fell, leaving behind only a wasteland of destruction. Greenman's body lay on the ground, severed in two. The consciousness it had worked so hard to develop was fading rapidly. Ethan approached, wanting to take a closer look at this strange creature. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was, indeed, just a mass of grass. It had woven itself into a humanoid shape, but in its chest was a round, glowing crystal. It pulsed faintly, clearly the source of its energy. It resembled a crystal core, but there was something different about it. How strong are you? A faint signal of thought emanated from Greenman's fading consciousness. I don't really know, Ethan replied honestly, unsure how to answer. So far, he hadn't encountered anyone who could truly match him. Greenman's soul trembled with profound shock. Are all creatures from beyond the mountain this terrifying? But alas, it would never grow to encompass the entire world. Even a blade of grass can dream of ruling the land. And in its final moments, as it faced complete annihilation, Greenman had one last thought. The city is too dangerous. I should have stayed in the mountains. With that, its withered body began to shrink, rot, and crumble into ash, scattering into the wind. When Greenman completely perished, it left behind a glowing crystal where it had stood. Ethan picked it up, turning it over in his hands to examine it. The energy within was immense but chaotic. It clearly wasn't a crystal core. The crystal wasn't entirely transparent. Inside, there were fibrous structures that made it look more like a seed. Can I eat this? Ethan wondered. At his core, he was still a zombie, and his instincts revolved around one simple question: edible or not? This blade of grass had consumed a wide variety of nutrients, bugs, animals, zombies, and even other plants. It shouldn't be poisonous, right? Ethan wasn't particularly tempted by the seed. After all, he wasn't a herbivore. Instead, he thought about taking it home and planting it. Maybe it would grow into something interesting. Who knows how far it could develop? Driven by curiosity, Ethan stored the seed in his spatial storage ring. But just as he finished dealing with the seed, his nose twitched. He caught the faint scent of humans approaching. It wasn't unusual for humans to survive in Mount Wilson. Clearly, the commotion from his fight with Greenman had drawn them here. Sure enough, two people were crouched behind a boulder, sneaking peeks in his direction. What the hell happened? Those man-eating vines, they're all dead. One of them whispered. I have no idea, the other replied. The vines are definitely gone. Look, there's someone standing over there. He pointed at Ethan. Yeah, I see him, the first man nodded repeatedly. If the man-eating vines were still alive, there was no way any human, or any other creature, could be standing there. Your adventure continues at Empire. Could it be? He's the one who killed them. What are you even talking about? The first man shot back. In his mind, the man-eating vines were an unstoppable force, covering the entire mountain. There was no way a single person could take them
down. He's probably just like us, drawn here by the noise. But then why did the vines suddenly die for no reason? The second man asked, still baffled. The first man thought for a moment. They're plants, right? Sometimes plants just stop growing and die when they mature. Or maybe they ate something poisonous and got wiped out. Oh, that makes sense. These two weren't particularly sharp. They were awakeners who had managed to form neurocores, but their sensory abilities were limited. Before the apocalypse, they had worked as security guards for the wealthy in a gated community. Right now, both of them were thinking the same thing. The man-eating vines had absorbed countless nutrients, blood, flesh, and energy. Surely, they must have left behind a massive crystal core. If they could get their hands on it, they'd hit the jackpot.